Finally, the 32-year-old leech is out. No more cooking her meals. 2,188 likes. My Aunt Brenda commented, "Remember when she cried at 26 because McDonald's rejected her? Still jobless." My mother Susan posted before and after pictures, her pigsty room versus my new cave. My brother Caleb tagged his friends, "This is your future girlfriend." 45 comments bashing me. I stood in my damp basement room reading every single one. I took screenshots. I pressed the like button. Then I grabbed my suitcase. 2 weeks later, they realized what I had been hiding. 53 missed calls, 66 messages, all panicking, all begging, all too late. My name is Amelia. I am 32 years old, and until that afternoon, I was the designated failure of my supposedly perfect family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the family scapegoat who silently built an empire while everyone else counted you out. Growing up in a wealthy suburb of Chicago, my parents Richard and Susan valued appearances above all else. Richard ran a regional logistics company that he loved to brag about at the local country club. Susan spent her days maintaining our pristine 5-bedroom estate and judging anyone who did not meet her impossible standards. My older brother Caleb was the golden boy. He worked for our father, drove a luxury car, and recently married Nia, a stunning African-American woman with a sharp tongue who loved spending my parents' money almost as much as Susan did. I had spent the last 6 years living in the unfinished basement. It smelled of mildew and old cardboard. Water seeped through the concrete walls every time it rained. My family told everyone I was a lazy college dropout who refused to work. The truth was, I had moved down there to save every penny I earned. I never asked them for a dime. I bought my own groceries, paid my own phone bill, and quietly built my life while they treated me like an unwanted pest. I zipped up my single duffel bag. The zipper snagged, but I forced it closed. I walked up the wooden stairs. The sound of clinking wine glasses and loud laughter echoed from the living room. They were celebrating my departure. I reached the top of the landing. Richard stood there blocking the hallway. He wore his favorite tailored suit holding a glass of scotch. His face was flushed with alcohol and arrogance. "Going somewhere?" he asked, looking down at my bag with a sneer. "I am leaving," I said calmly. "Just like you wanted." "Good," Richard snapped. "It is about time you stopped dragging down our reputation. Caleb and Naya need that basement for their new home gym. But before you walk out my door, leave the laptop." I tightened my grip on my bag. "Excuse me." "The laptop," he repeated, holding out his hand. "You are not walking out of here with an expensive piece of equipment that I paid for. If you want to be independent, you can go buy your own computer with whatever minimum wage job you manage to find." Susan, Caleb, and Nia strolled into the hallway to watch the show. Nia took a sip of her wine, her designer jewelry clinking. "Just give it to him, Amelia. You probably just use it to watch movies all day anyway. Look at your clothes. You are messing up the aesthetic of my new rug." I looked at Nia, then at my father. "You did not buy this laptop, Richard." His face darkened. "Do not lie to me. You have not held a real job in 6 years. You live under my roof eating my food. Everything you own belongs to me." I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. "4 years ago, you left your company credit card on the kitchen counter," I said. "You claimed it was stolen. The bank refunded the fraudulent charges. But I know Caleb used it to pay off his sports betting debts. I bought this laptop with cash I earned from freelance coding, cash I made while you were busy covering up Caleb's financial disasters." Caleb lunged forward, his face twisting with rage. "Shut your mouth, you crazy loser." Richard held up his hand to stop him, but his eyes were furious. "You are delusional. Leave the bag and get out." "No," I said. "This bag contains my clothes and my work. You have no legal right to touch it." Susan scoffed, stepping closer to Richard. "Legal right? You are standing in our house, Amelia. You are nothing but a squatter. We should have charged you rent for that basement. If you had charged me rent, you might not be 3 months behind on your property taxes," I replied smoothly. The hallway went completely silent. Susan's mouth dropped open. Richard's face turned a dangerous shade of red. They had kept their financial struggles a closely guarded secret. They thought nobody knew about the failing business, the mounting debts, the desperate loans. "How do you know about that?" Richard demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I know a lot of things," I said, maintaining steady eye contact. "I know Nia's luxury car lease was denied last month because Caleb's credit score is in the gutter. I know Susan's country club membership was suspended for non-payment. I know your logistics company lost its two biggest clients this quarter. You love to call me a leech on Facebook, Richard, but we both know who is really sinking in this house." Nia glared at Caleb. "Is that true about the car lease?" she hissed. "Shut up," Caleb muttered, looking panicked. I stepped forward. Richard was so stunned that he instinctively moved aside. I walked past them toward the front door. The grand foyer felt suffocating, but the exit was right in front of me. "You are dead to us!" Susan screamed from the hallway, recovering her voice. "Do not ever come crawling back here when you fail." I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I turned back to look at the four of them. They looked so desperate, so determined to project power while their world was crumbling around them. "Do not worry, Susan," I said. "I will not be the one crawling." I opened the door and walked out into the crisp afternoon air. My ride was waiting in the driveway. I climbed into the back seat and told the driver to take me to the financial district. As we pulled away from the sprawling suburban house, I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. I checked the balance on my primary business account. It displayed 8 figures. I smiled as I looked out the window. The countdown had officially begun, and they had no idea what was coming for them. Finally, the 32-year-old leech is out. No more cooking her meals. 2,188 likes. My Aunt Brenda commented, "Remember when she cried at 26 because McDonald's rejected her, still jobless?" My mother Susan posted before and after pictures, her pigsty room versus my new cave. My brother Caleb tagged his friends. "This is your future girlfriend." 45 comments bashing me. I stood in my damp basement room reading every single one. I took screenshots. I pressed the like button. Then I grabbed my suitcase. 2 weeks later, they realized what I had been hiding. 53 missed calls, 66 messages, all panicking, all begging, all too late. My name is Amelia. I am 32 years old, and until that afternoon, I was the designated failure of my supposedly perfect family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the family scapegoat who silently built an empire while everyone else counted you out. Growing up in a wealthy suburb of Chicago, my parents Richard and Susan valued appearances above all else. Richard ran a regional logistics company that he loved to brag about at the local country club. Susan spent her days maintaining our pristine 5-bedroom estate and judging anyone who did not meet her impossible standards. My older brother Caleb was the golden boy. He worked for our father, drove a luxury car, and recently married Nia, a stunning African-American woman with a sharp tongue who loved spending my parents' money almost as much as Susan did. I dragged my heavy suitcase up the basement stairs and stepped into the blinding light of the main living room. The space was a monument to my parents' financial delusion. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a harsh glow over the custom Italian leather sectionals and the imported mahogany coffee table. Sitting right in the center of this fabricated wealth were Susan, Caleb, and my sister-in-law, Nia. They were passing around a bottle of expensive red wine, their faces flushed with the thrill of finally kicking me out. Nia sat cross-legged on the pristine white sofa. She wore a silk designer blouse and heavy gold bracelets that clinked loudly against her crystal wine glass. When she saw me standing there with my single duffel bag, a cruel smirk spread across her perfectly contoured face. "Look who finally emerged from the dungeon," Nia said, taking a slow sip of her wine. "Are you actually going out in public wearing that? Those jeans look like they survived a house fire. I suppose you cannot afford anything better when you do not have a real job." Susan laughed, a high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. She adjusted her diamond necklace and shook her head. Do not be too hard on her, Nia. We all know Amelia peaked in high school. It has been a steady downhill slide ever since. Caleb leaned back against the cushions, looking incredibly smug. He pointed his wine glass at me. Remember when she was 26 and came home sobbing because even McDonald's would not hire her? That was peak comedy. The regional manager told her she lacked basic communication skills. Now she is 32 and still wearing the same pathetic clothes from 6 years ago. I stood perfectly still. I did not drop my bag. I did not raise my voice. I let them enjoy their moment of superiority because I knew exactly how fragile it was. They loved bringing up that rejection from McDonald's. They used it as the ultimate proof of my incompetence. What they did not know was that I had intentionally sabotaged that interview to keep them from discovering I was already managing a massive online retail portfolio. I needed them to think I was a failure so they would leave me alone in the basement to build my empire. You are right, Nia, I said, my voice dangerously calm. These clothes are incredibly cheap. I bought them at a thrift store for $12. Nia rolled her eyes and exchanged a knowing glance with Susan. At least you admit you are a walking disaster, she scoffed. You should try having some self-respect, Amelia. Look at this bag. She proudly patted the bright orange Hermes Birkin sitting beside her on the sofa. Caleb bought this for me last month just because it was a Tuesday. That is what a real man does. He provides. You will never know what that feels like. I looked at the bright orange leather of the Hermes bag. Then I looked directly into Nia's eyes. You are absolutely right, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly even. It is a beautiful bag, Nia. But the reason my clothes are so cheap is because I just had to liquidate $5,000 from my emergency savings to pay off the credit card debt Caleb secretly racked up to buy you that exact Hermes bag last month. The living room went dead silent. The smug smile instantly vanished from Nia's face. She froze her wine glass halfway to her mouth. Susan stopped adjusting her necklace. What are you talking about? Nia demanded, her voice suddenly sharp. Caleb got a bonus from work. He paid cash. I did not break eye contact with her. Caleb does not get bonuses, Nia. Richard has not paid out a single corporate bonus in 3 years because the company is drowning in debt. Caleb stole a credit card that was still registered under my name from when we shared a family account 5 years ago. He maxed it out to buy that bag because his own credit score is so terrible he cannot even qualify for a standard store card. I paid the $5,000 balance yesterday to avoid a fraud investigation. So technically, Nia, I am the one who bought you that bag. You are welcome. Nia's head snapped toward Caleb. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of shock and pure rage. Tell me she is lying, Caleb. Tell me you did not buy my gift with your sister's stolen credit card. Caleb was pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked at Susan for help, but my mother was staring at the floor, completely speechless. Caleb had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Susan had spent decades covering up his mistakes, paying off his gambling debts, and hiding his financial incompetence from the rest of the world. But she could not hide this, not right in front of his wife. You lied to me, Nia shrieked, standing up so fast she spilled red wine on the white leather sofa. You told me you closed that major account. You told me we were doing great financially. Nia. Baby, calm down, Caleb stammered, holding his hands up defensively. She is just trying to start drama because she is jealous. She is a liar. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen a few times and held up the digital receipt from the luxury boutique. It showed the exact date, the exact purchase amount, and the last 4 digits of the credit card. Would you like me to read the transaction number out loud? I asked. Or maybe we should call the boutique and ask them to pull the security footage of Caleb swiping my card. Caleb lost his mind, his face contorted with absolute fury. The facade of the wealthy, successful businessman shattered completely. He dropped his wine glass onto the imported rug, letting it shatter into pieces. He let out a primal scream and lunged across the coffee table, aiming straight for me. I did not even flinch. Before Caleb could reach me, a loud voice thundered from the hallway. "Stop right there, you idiot!" Richard rushed into the room and grabbed Caleb by the collar of his expensive dress shirt, violently yanking him backward. Caleb stumbled and crashed into a heavy wooden side table. "Dad, let me go!" Caleb yelled, struggling against our father's grip. "She is ruining everything. I am going to teach her a lesson." Richard was not intervening out of fatherly protection. He did not care if Caleb hit me. His eyes were wide with panic as he looked around the room at the chaotic scene. "Are you out of your mind?" Richard screamed at his son. "Look at what you are doing. That sofa costs more than your car. If you knock over that antique Ming vase fighting with this worthless girl, I will make you pay for it yourself. Do you know how much money is sitting in this room? We cannot afford to replace any of this." Richard shoved Caleb back onto the ruined sofa. Nia was standing in the corner looking at her husband with absolute disgust. The Hermes bag sat abandoned on the floor, surrounded by broken glass and spilled red wine. The pristine image of their wealthy, perfect family had been completely destroyed in less than 5 minutes. I stood there watching the three of them turn on each other. The satisfaction I felt was cold and absolute. They had spent my entire life making me feel like an outsider, making me feel small and insignificant. Now they were tearing each other apart over a single truth I had dropped into their laps. I picked up my duffel bag and adjusted the strap on my shoulder. I looked at the spilled wine soaking into the expensive rug. I looked at Caleb avoiding his wife's furious glare. Then I looked at Richard, who was frantically trying to wipe the wine off the white leather with his handkerchief. "I will leave you all to deal with your mess," I said quietly. I turned my back on the living room and walked toward the front door. The sound of Nia yelling at Caleb echoed behind me, followed by Richard's desperate attempts to silence them both. They were so consumed by their own fabricated drama that they did not even realize I was walking out with the keys to their entire future in my pocket. I was halfway to the heavy oak front door when the sharp ringing of a cell phone pierced the tense atmosphere of the living room. I paused, my hand hovering just inches from the brass doorknob. The sound came from Susan. She fumbled with her device, her manicured fingers tapping the screen with desperate urgency. She needed a lifeline. She needed someone to help her regain control of the narrative after I had just shattered her perfect image in front of her daughter-in-law. Susan answered the FaceTime call and immediately thrust the screen outward, pointing the camera directly at my back. It was Aunt Brenda. Her shrill voice echoed through the massive foyer, cutting through the sounds of Caleb and Nia aggressively arguing in the background. Brenda was the chief gossip of the family, the woman who had proudly commented on Richard's Facebook post just an hour earlier, mocking my fast food rejection and calling me a jobless loser. "Amelia, are you seriously throwing a tantrum right now?" Brenda screeched through the phone's speaker. Her face filled the screen, distorted by her angry expression and her heavy makeup. "Your mother just texted me that you are causing a scene and trying to ruin their peaceful weekend. You are 32 years old, for heaven's sake. When are you going to stop playing the victim and actually do something with your miserable life? You should be down on your knees thanking Richard and Susan for letting you hide in their basement all these years." Susan stood taller, holding the phone like a weapon. A smug, satisfied look temporarily replaced the panic on her face. She thought she had won. She thought bringing in the family matriarch of gossip would shame me back into submission. Richard stopped scrubbing the wine stain on the rug and looked up, crossing his arms as if waiting for me to break down and apologize. I did not break down. I did not run out the door. I turned around slowly, my duffel bag hanging heavily from my shoulder. I walked right back into the center of the living room, my heels clicking methodically against the hardwood floor. Susan held her ground, thinking I was coming to beg for forgiveness. Instead, I reached out and snatched the phone directly out of her hands with a swift, fluid motion. Susan gasped in shock, stepping back. "Excuse me," she sputtered. I held the phone up to my face, staring dead into the camera. Brenda was mid-sentence, rambling about how I was a permanent stain on the family legacy. When she saw my eyes completely devoid of fear or intimidation, her mouth clamped shut. "Aunt Brenda, I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy register that demanded absolute silence in the room. You have a lot of nerve lecturing me about being a leech on this family. You love talking about my failures on social media. You love reminding everyone about my depression 6 years ago, but you always conveniently leave out the best part of that story. Brenda's eyes darted back and forth on the screen. Her bravado vanished instantly, replaced by a sudden, frantic panic. "Amelia, do not you dare!" she stammered, her voice dropping to an anxious whisper. "Oh, I am definitely going to dare," I replied, holding the phone higher so Richard and Susan could see her terrified face. "Do you remember when I was in the hospital for 2 weeks during my mental health crisis? You came to visit me. You brought flowers. You held my hand and told me family always protects each other. But what you actually did was dig through my wallet while I was sleeping medicated. The living room was completely paralyzed." Nia stopped yelling at Caleb and turned her full attention to the phone. "My social security number did not magically appear on your loan application. Brenda," I stated, every word striking like a hammer. "You stole my identity. You took out a $10,000 personal loan under my name to fund your luxury cruise to the Bahamas with your new boyfriend. You let that loan default and completely ruined my credit score while I was fighting to survive. I spent 4 years quietly working double shifts and paying off every single cent of that fraudulent debt because I thought exposing you would destroy our family." Brenda's face drained of all color. She looked absolutely horrified. "You committed a federal crime, Brenda." I continued, my tone completely ruthless. "I have the original loan documents. I have the IP address logs showing the application was submitted from your home network. I have the forged signature. I drafted the police report 5 years ago, but I kept it in my desk drawer. I kept your dirty secret to protect the family peace. But since you enjoy posting my personal business on Facebook for 2,000 people to mock, I think it is only fair I share your financial fraud with the local authorities." "No, no, Amelia. Please listen to me." Brenda gasped, her voice cracking with pure terror. "We can talk about this privately. Please do not do this." "You lost the right to privacy when you commented on that post," I said. "Do not ever speak my name again." Before she could utter another desperate apology, I tapped the red button and ended the call. The screen went black. I tossed the phone casually onto the ruined white leather sofa right next to Nia's abandoned Hermes bag. I looked at Susan. My mother was trembling, staring at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. She had spent her entire life trying to impress Brenda, trying to maintain their status in the family hierarchy. Now she knew her own sister had stolen from her daughter, and she had nothing to say. Richard stood completely frozen, his jaw tight, unable to comprehend the magnitude of the secrets I had just exposed. Nia looked at her husband and her in-laws with an expression of absolute disgust, realizing she had married into a family of thieves and liars. I reached into the front pocket of my jacket, my fingers wrapped around the heavy brass keys to the suburban estate. I pulled them out and held them up, catching the light from the crystal chandelier. "You wanted me out, Richard," I said, turning my attention to my father. "You got your wish. You wanted to clean house. You wanted to remove the leech. Consider it done." I tossed the keys onto the imported mahogany coffee table. The heavy metal hit the glass surface with a loud, sharp clatter that echoed through the silent room. "But I want you to remember this moment," I said, looking at all four of them. "I want you to remember how eager you were to throw me out on the street. Because in exactly 2 weeks there will be a massive change in this house. A change none of you are prepared for. Enjoy your luxury while it lasts." I turned my back on them for the final time. I walked out of the living room through the grand foyer and pushed open the heavy front door. The cool, crisp afternoon air hit my face, feeling like absolute freedom. A sleek, black, uber-black SUV was waiting patiently at the end of the long, winding driveway. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door for me, respectfully taking my single battered duffel bag and placing it in the trunk. I slid into the luxurious leather seat and gave the driver my destination. As the car pulled away from the curb, I did not look back at the sprawling suburban fortress. I did not look back at the parents who had despised me, or the brother who had robbed me. I leaned my head against the tinted window and took a deep, steadying breath. The pathetic basement-dwelling version of Amelia was dead. She had died the moment Richard posted that cruel joke on the internet. The woman sitting in the back of the car was entirely different. I pulled out my phone and sent a brief text message to my lead attorney giving him the green light to initiate the next phase of the plan. The dominoes had officially been tipped over. My family thought they had finally gotten rid of their biggest problem, but they had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to tear down their entire fake empire. The Uber Black glides through the bustling streets of downtown Chicago. The sprawling suburban neighborhoods with their manicured lawns and fake smiles fade into the distance, replaced by towering glass skyscrapers and the undeniable pulse of real power. The driver pulls up to the discreet, heavily guarded entrance of the city's most exclusive high-rise building. I step out of the vehicle, leaving the musty smell of that damp basement behind me forever. The concierge immediately stands at attention, greeting me with deep respect. It is a stark contrast to the utter disdain I received from my own family just an hour ago. He swipes a specialized security card, granting me sole access to the private elevator. The heavy steel doors close and the high-speed lift launches me upward to the very top floor. The doors slide open silently, revealing my actual reality. Welcome to my $4 million penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrap around the entire expansive living space, offering an unobstructed panoramic view of the magnificent city skyline and the vast, dark waters of Lake Michigan. The floors are heated Italian marble, and original contemporary artwork adorns the pristine walls. A state-of-the-art smart home system adjusts the ambient lighting the moment I cross the threshold. It is a completely different universe from the windowless concrete box I had occupied for the past 6 years. I drop my battered duffel bag onto the spotless floor. I walk directly into the sprawling master suite and strip off the cheap $12 jeans and the faded, oversized sweater. Those clothes were my armor. They were a carefully crafted disguise designed to make my family feel superior, while I silently conquered the business world right under their arrogant noses. I step into the massive walk-in closet and pull out a sharply tailored charcoal gray blazer and perfectly fitted trousers. I slip them on, feeling the crisp, expensive fabric settle against my skin. I slide into a pair of black designer stilettos. When I look in the full-length mirror, the pathetic college dropout is completely gone. In her place stands a woman who commands corporate boardrooms and dictates international market trends. I walk back into the main living area, where my lead attorney is already waiting for me. David sits on a white leather sofa, casually sipping an espresso. He is 45, impeccably dressed, and possesses a legal mind like a steel trap. He has been my most trusted advisor and confidant since the very beginning of my journey. On the glass coffee table in front of him rests a thick stack of dense manila folders. "You made excellent time," Amelia David says, setting his espresso cup down. "I assume the extraction went exactly as planned." "It went perfectly," I reply, taking a seat opposite him. Richard finally posted his triumphant announcement on Facebook. He gave me the exact public exit I needed to cut all personal ties cleanly. Now they think they have discarded their biggest burden. David smiles, a sharp, predatory expression. Little do they know they just evicted the founder and anonymous chief executive officer of Vanguard Logistics. The sound of my company name hangs in the quiet luxury of the penthouse. Vanguard Logistics is not just a business. It is a massive e-commerce logistics juggernaut that processes millions of shipments daily, dominating the supply chain sector across North America. I built the entire corporation from absolute scratch, using a refurbished laptop on a folding card table in my parents' basement. While Susan was complaining about me eating her leftover food, I was negotiating 9-figure contracts with international shipping conglomerates. While Caleb was placing reckless sports bets with my stolen credit card, I was acquiring regional delivery networks and expanding my corporate footprint. I stayed completely anonymous, hiding behind complex layers of corporate shell companies and ironclad non-disclosure agreements. I needed absolute secrecy to execute my ultimate strategy. You might wonder why a billionaire CEO would choose to live in a miserable, leaky basement for 6 years. The answer is simple. Keep your friends close and your enemies entirely dependent on you. Richard is a loud, arrogant man who loves to boast about his regional trucking company. But his company is a hollow shell rotting from the inside out due to his catastrophic financial mismanagement and Caleb's relentless embezzlement. For the last 4 years, Richard's business has only survived because of one major corporate client. That client provides 80% of their total operating revenue. Richard thinks he secured a brilliant partnership with a mysterious corporate entity. He has absolutely no idea that the entity keeping him from total bankruptcy is a direct subsidiary of Vanguard Logistics. He has been working for me this entire time. David opens the top folder and slides a heavy document toward me. We are ready to proceed with the acquisition phase, he states smoothly. Richard is currently leveraged to the breaking point. His corporate credit lines are maxed out, and he has missed 2 consecutive payments to his primary creditors. The moment we pull our contracts, his entire operation will collapse within 72 hours. I look down at the financial spreadsheets detailing my father's impending ruin. I feel no guilt. I feel no hesitation. Richard and Susan built their entire identity on crushing my spirit. They demanded absolute perfection and threw me away the second I showed a moment of vulnerability years ago. They let the entire extended family mock me online, treating my fabricated failure as a source of endless entertainment. They demanded I pack my bags completely unaware that my bags were already packed with their financial ruin. The time for hiding is over, I tell David. They wanted me out of their house. Now they will understand the true cost of their cruelty. I want every single document prepared. I want the asset seizures lined up perfectly. I want to make sure that when the floor drops out from under them, they have absolutely nothing to grab onto. David nods, gathering the paperwork. Consider it done, Amelia. The Vanguard legal team is standing by. We will execute the contract terminations exactly on your schedule. I walk back over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city lights beginning to flicker on in the early evening dusk. My family thought they had finally won. They thought they had expelled the leech. But they had no idea they had just unleashed a predator. The game of playing the pathetic daughter is officially over. The era of the CEO has begun. The Uber Black glides through the bustling streets of downtown Chicago. The sprawling suburban neighborhoods with their manicured lawns and fake smiles fade into the distance, replaced by towering glass skyscrapers and the undeniable pulse of real power. The driver pulls up to the discreet, heavily guarded entrance of the city's most exclusive high-rise building. I step out of the vehicle, leaving the musty smell of that damp basement behind me forever. The concierge immediately stands at attention, greeting me with deep respect. It is a stark contrast to the utter disdain I received from my own family just an hour ago. He swipes a specialized security card, granting me sole access to the private elevator. The heavy steel doors close and the high-speed lift launches me upward to the very top floor. The doors slide open silently, revealing my actual reality. Welcome to my $4 million penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrap around the entire expansive living space, offering an unobstructed panoramic view of the magnificent city skyline and the vast dark waters of Lake Michigan. The floors are heated Italian marble, and original contemporary artwork adorns the pristine walls. A state-of-the-art smart home system adjusts the ambient lighting the moment I cross the threshold. It is a completely different universe from the windowless concrete box I had occupied for the past 6 years. I drop my battered duffel bag onto the spotless floor. I walk directly into the sprawling master suite and strip off the cheap $12 jeans and the faded oversized sweater. Those clothes were my armor, They were a carefully crafted disguise, designed to make my family feel superior, while I silently conquered the business world right under their arrogant noses. I step into the massive walk-in closet and pull out a sharply tailored charcoal gray blazer and perfectly fitted trousers. I slip them on, feeling the crisp, expensive fabric settle against my skin. I slide into a pair of black designer stilettos. When I look in the full-length mirror, the pathetic college dropout is completely gone. In her place stands a woman who commands corporate boardrooms and dictates international market trends. I walk back into the main living area, where my lead attorney is already waiting for me. David sits on a white leather sofa, casually sipping an espresso. He is 45, impeccably dressed, and possesses a legal mind like a steel trap. He has been my most trusted advisor and confidant since the very beginning of my journey. On the glass coffee table in front of him rests a thick stack of dense manila folders. "You made excellent time, Amelia," David says, setting his espresso cup down. "I assume the extraction went exactly as planned." "It went perfectly," I reply, taking a seat opposite him. Richard finally posted his triumphant announcement on Facebook. He gave me the exact public exit I needed to cut all personal ties cleanly. Now they think they have discarded their biggest burden. David smiles a sharp, predatory expression. Little do they know they just evicted the founder and anonymous chief executive officer of Vanguard Logistics. The sound of my company name hangs in the quiet luxury of the penthouse. Vanguard Logistics is not just a business. It is a massive e-commerce logistics juggernaut that processes millions of shipments daily, dominating the supply chain sector across North America. I built the entire corporation from absolute scratch, using a refurbished laptop on a folding card table in my parents' basement. While Susan was complaining about me eating her leftover food, I was negotiating 9-figure contracts with international shipping conglomerates. While Caleb was placing reckless sports bets with my stolen credit card, I was acquiring regional delivery networks and expanding my corporate footprint. I stayed completely anonymous, hiding behind complex layers of corporate shell companies and ironclad non-disclosure agreements. I needed absolute secrecy to execute my ultimate strategy. You might wonder why a billionaire CEO would choose to live in a miserable, leaky basement for 6 years. The answer is simple. Keep your friends close and your enemies entirely dependent on you. Richard is a loud, arrogant man who loves to boast about his regional trucking company. But his company is a hollow shell rotting from the inside out due to his catastrophic financial mismanagement and Caleb's relentless embezzlement. For the last 4 years, Richard's business has only survived because of one major corporate client. That client provides 80% of their total operating revenue. Richard thinks he secured a brilliant partnership with a mysterious corporate entity. He has absolutely no idea that the entity keeping him from total bankruptcy is a direct subsidiary of Vanguard Logistics. He has been working for me this entire time. David opens the top folder and slides a heavy document toward me. "We are ready to proceed with the acquisition phase," he states smoothly. Richard is currently leveraged to the breaking point. His corporate credit lines are maxed out, and he has missed 2 consecutive payments to his primary creditors. The moment we pull our contracts, his entire operation will collapse within 72 hours. I look down at the financial spreadsheets detailing my father's impending ruin. I feel no guilt. I feel no hesitation. Richard and Susan built their entire identity on crushing my spirit. They demanded absolute perfection and threw me away the second I showed a moment of vulnerability years ago. They let the entire extended family mock me online, treating my fabricated failure as a source of endless entertainment. They demanded I pack my bags completely unaware that my bags were already packed with their financial ruin. "The time for hiding is over," I tell David. "They wanted me out of their house. Now they will understand the true cost of their cruelty. I want every single document prepared. I want the asset seizures lined up perfectly. I want to make sure that when the floor drops out from under them, they have absolutely nothing to grab onto." David nods, gathering the paperwork. Consider it done, Amelia. The Vanguard legal team is standing by. We will execute the contract terminations exactly on your schedule. I walk back over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights, beginning to flicker on in the early evening dusk. My family thought they had finally won. They thought they had expelled the leech. But they had no idea they had just unleashed a predator. The game of playing the pathetic daughter is officially over. The era of the CEO has begun. I turn back from the floor-to-ceiling windows and return to the white leather sofa. David has already opened a new manila folder. He spreads the thick stack of legal documents across the glass coffee table. The paper is crisp, and the black ink spells out the exact mechanism of my father's impending downfall. 2 years ago, Richard was bleeding cash faster than his trucking company could generate it. His desperate attempts to maintain the illusion of extreme wealth had finally caught up with him. The banks were preparing to seize the sprawling suburban estate. Susan was completely oblivious, busy planning expensive renovations for the main kitchen, while the foreclosure notices piled up in Richard's private office. Richard was trapped. That was when a private investment firm miraculously reached out offering to buy out his mortgage and restructure his debt with an incredibly generous interest rate. Richard was too arrogant to question his sudden stroke of good luck. He was too desperate to hire a competent attorney to review the fine print. He signed the paperwork immediately, believing his own business genius had somehow saved him. He never suspected that the anonymous investment firm was a subsidiary of Vanguard Logistics. I bought my parents' house right out from under them. I became their landlord and their bank, all while sleeping in their damp basement. David taps his gold pen against a specific paragraph on the third page of the contract. Section 4. Subsection B. He says, his voice perfectly level. The familial occupancy clause. This was your masterpiece, Amelia. I lean forward, resting my elbows on my knees. I designed that specific clause to serve as a legal tripwire, to maintain the artificially low interest rate that kept him from total bankruptcy. Richard was legally bound by a strict set of conditions. The contract explicitly stated that the primary residence must continue to house the immediate family members currently residing on the premises. It was a bizarre stipulation for a standard mortgage, but Richard was too blinded by the financial rescue to care. He signed a legally binding agreement to keep me in that house. By throwing me out this afternoon, Richard did not just execute a cruel parenting decision. He committed a direct and material breach of a commercial financial contract. David traces the line of text with his pen. By formally evicting you from the basement, he violated the core residency requirement. This breach triggers the acceleration clause. The generous interest rate is instantly voided. The entire remaining principal balance on the multi-million-dollar estate is due in full. He does not have the money, I state plainly. He does not even have a fraction of it. Exactly, David replies, closing the folder. He has 72 hours to produce the full amount before the property goes into active foreclosure. And we both know his corporate accounts are completely drained. I sit back against the sofa, feeling a profound sense of clarity. Every insult, every degrading comment, every time Susan complained about the cost of my existence, it was all a projection of their own massive failures. They were living in a house I owned. They were eating food bought with money generated by my company. But the house is only half the trap. David opens the final folder. This one contains the vendor agreements for Richard's logistics company. For 4 years, I used a shadow corporation to funnel massive shipping contracts to his failing business. I kept his trucks on the road. I kept his employees paid. I gave him the revenue he needed so Caleb could comfortably embezzle funds to buy designer bags for Nia. We have documented 27 distinct instances of delayed shipments and vendor non-compliance over the past fiscal quarter, David explains. Caleb's total lack of operational oversight gives us perfectly legal grounds for immediate termination of all corporate contracts. We do not even have to pay a cancellation penalty. If we pull the shipping contracts tonight, Richard will not be able to make payroll by Friday, I say, analyzing the timeline. His drivers will walk out. His fleet will sit idle. The bank will freeze his remaining business assets. He will be facing personal bankruptcy and a total corporate collapse simultaneously. David looks at me, waiting for the final command. The legal machinery is fully primed. Every document is drafted. Every notice is signed and ready for delivery. He just needs the word. I picture Richard standing in the hallway holding his glass of scotch, looking at my cheap duffel bag with absolute disgust. I picture Susan posting pictures of my basement room on social media to farm likes from her equally toxic friends. I picture Caleb laughing about my fast food rejection while wearing a watch paid for by my stolen credit card. They wanted a life without me. They are about to get exactly what they asked for. Activate the debt recall clause immediately, I say, my voice ringing with absolute authority. Cancel his company shipping contract. Send the foreclosure notice. David smiles a razor-sharp grin. He pulls out his phone and types a swift encrypted message to our executive legal team. Consider it done, he says. The termination notices will hit Richard's corporate email server within the hour. The physical foreclosure documents will be delivered to the estate via certified courier first thing Monday morning. The revenge machine is officially rolling. There is no stopping it now. There is no negotiating. I walk over to the sleek bar cart and pour myself a glass of sparkling water. I look out over the glittering Chicago skyline. Somewhere in those distant suburbs, Richard and Susan are probably clinking their wine glasses, celebrating their empty basement. They think they have finally excised the failure from their perfect family portrait. They are completely oblivious to the financial avalanche roaring straight toward their front door. The illusion is about to shatter, and I am going to watch every single piece fall. 14 days. That is exactly how long it took for the illusion to completely shatter. I spent those 2 weeks operating Vanguard Logistics from the quiet sanctuary of my penthouse, directing international supply chains and drinking imported coffee. The silence from my family was absolute. They thought they had won. They thought the trash had taken itself out. I let them enjoy their hollow victory. I let them measure the damp basement for Nia's new home gym. I let them plan their ridiculous expensive renovations with money they did not actually have. I gave them enough rope to hang themselves, and they eagerly tied the knot. Then Monday morning arrived. It was exactly 14 days since I walked out of their front door. I was sitting at my marble kitchen island reviewing quarterly profit margins when the first notification chimed. Then came the second, then a third. Within a span of 45 minutes, my pristine, silent morning turned into a digital war zone. My phone began to vibrate violently against the hard marble surface, spinning in small circles from the sheer volume of incoming alerts. I picked up the device and looked at the locked screen. 53 missed calls. 66 unread text messages. The notification badges were glowing an angry red, serving as a bright digital reflection of the absolute panic exploding in the suburbs. I unlocked the screen and opened the family group chat. I decided to read through the messages chronologically, watching their beautiful descent from supreme arrogance to total unhinged terror. The early messages from Richard were exactly what I expected. 2 days after I left, he had texted demanding to know where the spare keys to the basement were. He called me ungrateful. He reminded me that I owed him for 6 years of free housing. But as I scrolled down to the messages sent just an hour ago, the tone shifted dramatically. The corporate termination notices had hit his inbox at exactly 9 in the morning. His first text today read, "Amelia, call me right now. There is some massive error with the bank. They are freezing the company payroll accounts." 30 minutes later, the physical certified mail arrived at the estate. The message read, "Amelia, answer your phone. The bank just sent a foreclosure notice for the house. They are demanding the entire mortgage balance by Friday. This makes no sense. The investment firm is ignoring my calls. They are saying I breached a familial occupancy clause because you moved out. How is that even legal?" An hour later, the shipping contract cancellation took effect. Richard was completely spiraling. His texts became frantic, disjointed bursts of panic. "Amelia, the shipping contracts are gone. Vanguard dropped us. The trucks cannot leave the lot. We are completely bankrupt. Call me immediately. I need to know if you used my computer to mess with the bank accounts before you left. Answer the damn phone." I switched over to my private messages with Susan. Her dissent was even more pathetic. She did not care about the trucking company or the employees who would not get paid. She only cared about her social status and her luxury home. Her texts from last week started with complaints about how dusty my old room was and how I had ruined her aesthetic. Then today, the messages transformed into pure, desperate begging. Amelia, your father is having chest pains. The bank is taking the house. We are going to be out on the street by the end of the month. You always read those complicated financial books in the basement. Do you know anyone at these investment firms? Please call us back. We need your help. We are family. You have to do something. Even Caleb had sent a direct message. The golden boy who had lunged at me 2 weeks ago trying to physically attack me over a stolen credit card was now begging for a lifeline. Amelia Nia is packing her bags. She saw the foreclosure notice and completely lost her mind. The credit cards are declining everywhere. Dad says the company is dead. Do you have any of that freelance cash left? I just need a few thousand to keep Nia from walking out the door until Dad fixes this mess. Please, sis. I sat there in the quiet luxury of my penthouse reading their desperate pleas. They were drowning. The water was rising over their heads and they were thrashing wildly, looking for anyone to pull them out. They actually thought they could treat me like a disease for 32 years, publicly humiliate me, throw me out on the street, and then demand my loyalty the second their bank accounts hit zero. I felt no pity. I felt no urge to rescue them. They had built this execution block with their own hands. I just pulled the lever. I opened my photo gallery and scrolled back exactly 14 days. I found the screenshot I had taken while standing in that damp, miserable basement. It was the image of Richard's triumphant Facebook post. The post where he proudly called me a 32-year-old leech. The post where he celebrated kicking me out into the cold. The post that garnered 2,188 likes from their shallow country club friends. The image clearly showed Susan's cruel before and after photos of my room. It captured Caleb's mocking comment and Aunt Brenda's vicious insults about my mental health. It was the digital monument they had built to celebrate my destruction. I selected the image. I opened the family group chat where 53 missed calls and 66 messages of pure panic were currently sitting unanswered. I did not type a single word of explanation. I did not offer any comfort. I did not gloat or brag or reveal my identity as the billionaire CEO who had just destroyed their entire lives. I simply attached the screenshot of that exact Facebook post and hit send. I watched the image load into the chat thread. The delivery receipt chimed, indicating they had all received it. Within 3 seconds, the phone began to vibrate wildly again. Richard was calling. Susan was calling. The group chat erupted with a dozen new typing bubbles. They saw the screenshot. They saw the exact moment they had sealed their own fate. They were finally realizing that their cruel public joke was the direct catalyst for their absolute ruin. The realization that they had brought this apocalypse upon themselves was hitting them with the force of a freight train. I did not answer the calls. I set the phone face down on the cool marble counter, silencing the frantic vibrations. I picked up my coffee mug, walked over to my laptop, and returned to running my global empire. The trap had snapped shut, and they were completely alone in the dark. I sat behind my massive obsidian desk on the top floor of the Vanguard Logistics Tower. My wall-sized security monitor was silently broadcasting the live feed from the ground floor lobby. The Vanguard headquarters is a towering monolith of steel and tinted glass, dominating the Chicago business district. It is a fortress of modern commerce designed to intimidate. And right now it was doing exactly that to the two men bursting through the revolving front doors. Richard and Caleb looked like they had aged a decade in the past 48 hours. Richard was wearing his most expensive navy suit, but the jacket was terribly wrinkled, and dark sweat stains had bloomed under his arms. He was clutching a leather briefcase to his chest like a life preserver. Caleb trailed slightly behind him, looking completely unhinged. His tie was pulled loose, and he was aggressively scanning the pristine lobby as if looking for someone to punch. They had no idea I was watching their every move in ultra-high definition. They marched straight toward the main reception desk. The lobby of Vanguard is deliberately minimalist. White marble floors, sleek chrome accents, and a massive digital globe tracking our shipping fleet across the planet. Behind the curved reception desk sat my lead concierge, Anna. I had personally instructed Anna on exactly how to handle these two specific walk-ins. I turned up the audio feed on my monitor to hear every word. "We need to speak to the chief executive officer immediately," Richard demanded, slamming his briefcase down onto the marble counter. His voice echoed too loudly in the quiet professional space. "There has been a catastrophic administrative error regarding our shipping contracts. I am the owner of Zenith Freight, and your legal department just illegally terminated our partnership." Anna did not even blink. She typed calmly on her keyboard, her expression entirely pleasant and entirely void of warmth. "Good morning, sir," she replied, her voice smooth and practiced. "Do you have a scheduled appointment with the executive office today?" "Appointments are for vendors," Richard snapped, leaning heavily over the desk. "I am a primary partner. Someone in your billing department made a massive mistake and froze our entire fleet. If I do not speak to the CEO right now, this company is going to be held liable for millions of dollars in damages. Tell whoever is in charge that Richard is here, and I am not leaving until this is fixed." I watched Caleb step up beside his father. The golden boy could not handle the fact that a receptionist was not instantly bowing to their demands. His signature arrogance, the same arrogance that allowed him to steal my credit card to buy designer bags for Nia, flared up instantly. He slammed his palm against the counter, right next to Anna, leaving a sweaty handprint on the marble. "Listen to me," Caleb snarled, pointing a finger at her. "You clearly do not know who we are. We are not some local delivery service. We own the biggest transport fleet in the region. Your company needs us. You go pick up that phone and tell your boss that if he does not get down here in exactly 5 minutes, we are walking out that door and taking our business to your biggest competitor. And then I am going to make sure my lawyers personally sue you for gross negligence." I chuckled softly in my quiet office, taking a sip of my dark coffee. It was fascinating to watch them lie so brazenly. Zenith Freight was completely dead. The bank had already frozen their accounts. Their trucks had no fuel. Their drivers were actively quitting and returning their keys. Yet here they were, trying to bully their way into a boardroom by projecting a mirage of power they no longer possessed. They were drowning men threatening the ocean. "Sir, I must ask you to lower your voice," Anna said, maintaining her flawless composure. Vanguard. Logistics does not accept walk-in appointments for the executive floor under any circumstances. If you would like to leave your contact information, I can forward your complaint to the Regional Vendor Management team. Regional Vendor Management. Richard yelled, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "Do not insult me. I am not dealing with middle management. Your company is attempting to bankrupt my family over a clerical error. I want the CEO. Now." Caleb scoffed loudly, pacing back and forth in front of the desk. He was sweating profusely, clearly terrified that his luxurious lifestyle was evaporating. He knew Nia would pack her bags the second the credit cards declined again. "This place is a joke," Caleb muttered loudly enough for the passing employees to hear. "Dad, we should just call our legal team and crush them. This receptionist is probably just a temp who does not even understand what a multi-million-dollar contract looks like." Anna stopped typing. She looked up at Caleb. Her eyes were sharp and calculating. I had chosen her for this position specifically because she could handle hostile corporate acquisitions without breaking a sweat. She looked at the two desperate men in front of her and smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. She reached up and pressed a small silver earpiece. "Yes, Mom," she murmured into the hidden microphone. "They are currently at the front desk." "Understood." I had just pressed the intercom button on my desk. "Send them up," I commanded. Anna released her earpiece and looked back at Richard and Caleb. The annoyance had completely vanished from her face, replaced by a chilling professional courtesy. She picked up 2 black security badges and slid them across the marble counter. "Gentlemen," Anna said, her voice echoing perfectly in the tense silence of the lobby. "It seems your situation has been escalated. You are authorized for the executive elevator. The chief executive officer is ready to see you now." Richard let out a heavy breath of relief, snatching the security badge from the counter. He adjusted his wrinkled suit jacket and ran a trembling hand through his thinning hair. He looked at Caleb and nodded a triumphant smirk, finally returning to his face. "See," Richard muttered to his son. "I told you. You just have to show these corporate suits that you are not afraid to play hardball. They know they screwed up. They are probably going to offer us a massive settlement just to keep us quiet." Caleb grabbed his badge and shot a final arrogant glare at Anna. "Next time, learn how to treat the people who actually pay your salary," he sneered. They turned and walked toward the private glass elevator at the end of the hall. They swiped their badges. The heavy steel doors slid open and they stepped inside, perfectly confident that they were about to bully a terrified executive into saving their family empire. I watched the camera feed switch to the interior of the elevator as they began their rapid ascent to the top floor. I stood up from my desk and smoothed the lines of my tailored blazer. I checked my reflection in the dark glass window, ensuring my expression was utterly unreadable. I walked over to the heavy double doors of my private boardroom and waited. They thought they were going to demand millions from a faceless corporate entity. They were about to step out of that elevator and realize they had just walked straight into a trap they could never escape. The heavy frosted glass doors of the executive boardroom slid open with a soft mechanical hiss. Richard and Caleb strode into the cavernous room, their footsteps echoing against the polished Brazilian hardwood floors. The space was designed to make visitors feel small. A massive 20-foot table carved from a single slab of black walnut dominated the center of the room, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a dizzying, vertigo-inducing view of the Chicago skyline. I sat at the very head of the table. I was leaning back in the plush leather chair of the chief executive officer, my hands steepled beneath my chin. I wore a bespoke charcoal gray suit tailored to absolute perfection, the sharp lines of the blazer contrasting sharply with the pathetic thrift store sweaters they were used to seeing me wear. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, professional style. I did not move when they entered. I simply watched them. Richard marched halfway into the room before his brain processed what his eyes were seeing. He stopped so abruptly that Caleb nearly collided with his back. The arrogant bluster that had carried my father up the elevator completely evaporated. He blinked hard, his face scrunching in absolute confusion. He looked around the empty boardroom, expecting to see a team of corporate lawyers or a terrifying billionaire executive waiting to negotiate. Instead, he only saw the daughter he had thrown out on the street exactly 14 days ago. Caleb peered over Richard's shoulder. His jaw dropped open. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in the massive room was the faint hum of the climate control system. Amelia Richard finally breathed out, his voice a mixture of shock and immediate rising anger. "What in the hell are you doing here?" I did not answer. I kept my eyes locked onto his, watching the gears slowly, clumsily turn in his head. Caleb pushed past our father, his face flushing with that familiar, violent rage. "How did you get up here?" Caleb demanded, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Did you bribe someone at the front desk? Are you working here as a janitor? Get out of that chair right now before I call security and have you arrested for trespassing." Richard stepped forward, gripping his leather briefcase so tightly his knuckles turned white. "This is unbelievable." Richard spat, his voice echoing in the large room. "You actually followed us here. You found out I had an emergency meeting with Vanguard Logistics, and you snuck into the building to beg for money. I told you 2 weeks ago that you were dead to us. Get out of this office immediately before the CEO arrives and has us all thrown in jail." I remained perfectly still. Their sheer inability to comprehend the reality in front of them was staggering. They were so conditioned to view me as a pathetic failure that their brains literally could not process the alternative. Even sitting in the seat of power, wearing clothes that cost more than their remaining bank balance, they still tried to force me back into the tiny box they had built for me. I slowly reached out and picked up the thick manila folder resting on the black walnut table. I did not break eye contact with Richard as I opened the cover. I pulled out a heavy stack of legal documents printed on premium bonded paper. I lifted the stack and tossed it casually across the smooth surface of the table. The document slid perfectly, stopping just inches from Richard's shaking hands. "Read it," I commanded. My voice was low, but it carried the absolute, unquestionable authority of someone who owned the very air they were breathing. Richard stared at the papers. He looked at Caleb, then back at me. "Do not play games with me, Amelia," he growled. "I am not looking at your pathetic resume. I am here to save my company." I stood up from the executive chair. I walked slowly around the edge of the massive table, the sharp click of my designer stilettos cutting through the silence like a metronome. I stopped just a few feet away from my father. I said, "Read it, Richard." I repeated my tone, dropping to a dangerous whisper. Something in my voice finally pierced through his delusion. His hands trembled as he reached down and picked up the top document. It was the original contract he had signed 2 years ago. The contract that saved his suburban estate from foreclosure. The contract that bound him to the absurd familial occupancy clause. Richard stared at the paper. His eyes darted across the text. He saw the official letterhead of the anonymous investment firm. Then he saw his own signature at the bottom of the page. "Turn to page 4, I instructed. Richard swallowed hard. He flipped the pages, the paper rustling loudly in his shaking hands. He reached the 4th page. His eyes scanned the final addendum. It was the disclosure of corporate ownership. The document clearly stated that the anonymous investment firm was a direct subsidiary of Vanguard Logistics. And right below that, it listed the sole proprietor and chief executive officer of the entire corporate umbrella. Amelia. The briefcase slipped from Richard's grip and crashed onto the hardwood floor. All the blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. He physically stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the conference table to keep himself from collapsing. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Caleb snatched the papers from his father's hand. "What is it?" Caleb demanded, scanning the text. His eyes widened as he read my name. He looked at the corporate seals, the notarized signatures, the absolute, undeniable proof of ownership. "No," Caleb stammered, backing away from me. "No, this is a forgery. This is a fake. You are a college dropout. You lived in our basement. You do not own a multi-billion-dollar logistics empire." I looked at my brother and smiled a cold, hollow smile. "I lived in your basement because I needed a quiet place to destroy your competitors, Caleb. I wore cheap clothes because I was funneling every single cent of my revenue into acquiring the supply chain networks that kept your pathetic trucking company alive." I turned my attention back to Richard, who was now gripping his chest, struggling to breathe. "You called me a leech, Richard," I said, stepping closer to him. "You told 2,000 people on Facebook that you were tired of feeding me. You kicked me out because you thought you were finally rid of your biggest burden. But you did not realize that the leech you were so eager to scrape off was the only thing pumping blood into your dying heart." Richard gasped for air. "Amelia," he wheezed, his voice completely broken. You bought the house." "I bought the house," I confirmed, my voice ringing like a gavel striking wood. "I bought your debt. I bought your shipping contracts. I own the roof over your head. I own the trucks sitting empty in your lots. I own the miserable life you try so hard to brag about at the country club." Caleb shook his head violently, throwing the papers onto the floor. "You cannot do this," he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "You cannot just take everything from us. We are your family." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that offered absolutely no comfort. "You stopped being my family the day you let everyone mock my depression online. You stopped being my family when you stole my credit card to buy designer bags for Nia. You made your choices. You wanted a successful corporate executive to save your bankrupt trucking business." I opened my arms, gesturing to the magnificent boardroom, the panoramic view of the city, and the empire I had built from nothing. "Well, Richard," I said, staring into his terrified eyes, "here I am. Welcome to Vanguard. Now get out of my building before I call security and have you arrested for trespassing." The reality of his impending poverty slammed into Caleb with the force of a concrete wall. His entire identity was built on my parents' money. Without Richard's company to steal from, Nia would leave him. The luxury cars would be repossessed. The country club would ban him. His brain simply short-circuited. With a guttural scream of absolute rage, Caleb lunged forward. He slammed his hands under the edge of the massive black walnut conference table, attempting to flip it over in a blind tantrum. He grunted, straining his muscles, his face turning an ugly shade of purple. It was a pathetic display. The table weighed over 2,000 pounds. It did not even budge a single inch. Frustrated by his own physical weakness, Caleb abandoned the table and charged directly toward me. He raised his fist, ready to strike the sister he had bullied his entire life. He never even made it past the first chair. The heavy frosted glass doors of the boardroom burst open. I had signaled my elite security team the exact moment Caleb raised his voice. Two towering security officers clad in dark suits intercepted him mid-stride. One officer grabbed Caleb by the shoulder, while the other swept his legs out from under him. The golden boy hit the polished Brazilian hardwood floor with a sickening thud. The sound of his expensive tailored suit ripping echoed loudly in the cavernous room. Caleb thrashed wildly, pressing his cheek against the floor, gasping for air, as the guards pinned his arms expertly behind his back. Richard stumbled backward, horrified at the sight of his precious son being treated like a common criminal. He looked at the security guards, and then turned his furious gaze back to me. His chest heaved, and spit flew from his lips, as he unleashed a desperate barrage of threats. "You are a monster!" Richard bellowed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "You think you can do this to us? You think you can just steal my entire life and get away with it? I am calling the police right now. I will have you arrested for financial fraud. I will call the federal authorities and tell them you manipulated corporate contracts. You are going to prison, Amelia." I sat completely unbothered, listening to his empty threats. Richard was not finished. He took a step forward, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "If the police do not lock you up, I will destroy you myself," he screamed. "I know people in this city. I know journalists. I will go to every major news outlet in Chicago and expose Vanguard Logistics. I will tell the entire world that this company is run by an unstable, vindictive dropout who defrauded her own family. I will drag your name through the mud until your stock plummets and your board of directors fires you. I will ruin your reputation just like I did on Facebook. You will be back in the gutter where you belong." I looked at the man who had tormented me for 3 decades. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. I did not laugh, but my deep amusement was impossible to hide. I let him pant and wheeze before I finally spoke. My voice was calm, cutting through his hysteria like a razor blade. "Go ahead, Richard," I said, leaning forward slightly. "Call the police. I would love to see their faces when you hand them the legally binding contracts you willingly signed because you were too cheap and too arrogant to hire a competent financial lawyer. Tell them how you breached the occupancy clause. And while the police are at your house investigating, please make sure to show them the documentation of Caleb committing credit card fraud to buy designer handbags. I am sure the authorities will find that incredibly fascinating." As for the media, I continued, standing up from my chair. "Please call your journalist friends. Tell them you were completely outsmarted by the daughter you forced to live in a damp basement. Tell them your multi-million-dollar logistics empire was secretly swallowed whole by the woman you publicly humiliated for 2,000 likes on the internet. But before you call the news, remember the ironclad non-disclosure agreements you signed with my subsidiary. If you breathe a single word of our corporate dealings to the press, my legal team will sue you into absolute oblivion. I will take your cars. I will take your retirement accounts. I will take the very clothes off your back." Richard stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The realization that he had absolutely no leverage finally broke him. His shoulders slumped, and his hands fell limply to his sides. He was completely powerless. I turned my attention to the head of my security detail. "Remove this trash from my floor," I commanded, my voice echoing with absolute authority. "Do not let them stop to catch their breath. Throw them out." The guards yanked Caleb roughly to his feet, ignoring his groans of pain. They marched him toward the door, gripping his arms like vices. Another guard grabbed Richard by the elbow, shoving the defeated patriarch forward. I walked out of the boardroom behind them, leaning against the glass wall of the executive corridor to watch the final act of their humiliation. The guards dragged my father and my brother out of the private suite and forced them into the glass elevator. The descent was a public spectacle. As the elevator reached the ground floor, the doors opened into the bustling main lobby. Dozens of high-level Vanguard employees, logistics analysts, and corporate directors stopped dead in their tracks. The entire lobby went dead silent. Everyone watched as the two men who had arrogantly bullied the receptionist just 20 minutes earlier were now being physically frog-marched across the white marble floor. Caleb's torn suit hung off his shoulders. Richard's face was buried in his hands, hiding his shame from the staring crowd. My employees watched with wide eyes as the guards shoved my father and my brother through the revolving glass doors, tossing them forcefully onto the cold, hard concrete of the Chicago pavement. I stood on the top floor looking down at the street below. The first phase of my vengeance was complete. They had walked into my building expecting to demand millions. They were walking away with absolutely nothing. Richard and Caleb returned to the suburban estate in absolute silence. They were physically bruised and mentally broken. The moment they walked through the front door, Susan knew their aggressive attempt to bully the chief executive officer of Vanguard Logistics had failed spectacularly. Her husband looked like a defeated old man, and her golden boy son was covered in dirt from the Chicago pavement. Susan did not ask for details, she did not console them. She immediately went to her favorite weapon. She grabbed her smartphone, sat at the kitchen island, and launched a massive digital smear campaign. Susan was a master of suburban manipulation. She opened Facebook and crafted a long, tear-jerking post designed to extract maximum sympathy from her wealthy friends. She typed furiously, casting herself as the ultimate victim of a cruel and heartless child. She wrote that she was completely heartbroken. She claimed that after lovingly housing and feeding her ungrateful daughter for 6 years, Amelia had maliciously stolen their family home. She completely fabricated a story about Amelia using illegal corporate loopholes and dark money to steal the roof over her elderly parents' heads. She ended the post with a dramatic plea for prayers and a statement about how a mother's love had been brutally betrayed. She hit publish. Within minutes, the notifications began to flood her screen. The post was a viral sensation within their local country club circle. The comments poured in by the hundreds. Wealthy housewives expressed their absolute outrage. Church members offered to organize a meal train. Distant relatives who had not spoken to them in years chimed in to call me a monster. Susan sat at the kitchen counter eagerly reading the comments aloud to Richard, soaking up the digital validation like a sponge. She felt powerful again. She thought she was winning the public relations war. Nia watched this entire pathetic performance from the living room. Nia was a fiercely intelligent African-American woman who had grown up navigating the harsh realities of the real estate market before marrying Caleb. She was highly observant and inherently pragmatic. She stood quietly, holding a glass of sparkling water, analyzing the situation with cold, calculated logic. The math simply was not making any sense. Nia knew fake wealth when she saw it. 2 weeks ago, Amelia had dropped a massive bombshell right in this very room about the stolen credit card and the Hermes bag. Nia had initially pushed that revelation aside, wanting to believe Caleb's frantic excuses. But today, Caleb had come home with a torn suit and a bruised face, mumbling incoherently about Vanguard Logistics and corporate takeovers. Rich, powerful men do not get physically thrown out of corporate lobbies onto the sidewalk. Rich men call their lawyers. Rich men sue. But Caleb and Richard were not calling any lawyers. They were hiding in their house, terrified of the outside world. Nia excused herself from the living room, leaving Susan to her fabricated Facebook tears. She walked silently up the grand staircase and headed straight for the master suite she shared with Caleb. She locked the heavy bedroom door behind her. It was time to find out exactly who she had married. Caleb was downstairs pouring his fifth glass of scotch, completely oblivious to his wife's sudden departure. Nia walked into the massive custom walk-in closet. She pushed aside a row of expensive designer coats and moved a heavy wooden shoe rack. Hidden behind a false wall panel was Caleb's digital floor safe. Caleb thought he was an absolute genius for installing it, but Nia had seen him enter the passcode months ago. It was his own birthday backward. Typical Caleb. Completely unoriginal and entirely predictable. She typed the code into the keypad. The electronic lock beeped, and the heavy steel door clicked open. Nia reached inside, expecting to find the valuable stock certificates and the generational trust fund documents Caleb always bragged about at dinner parties. Instead, she pulled out a nightmare. The safe was stuffed with thick stacks of red-stamped envelopes. Final notice. Past due. Imminent seizure of assets. Nia opened a bank statement from Caleb's private offshore checking account. The balance was -$400. She found credit card statements under names she did not even recognize, all maxed out to their absolute limits, with exorbitant penalty fees attached. Then she found a separate heavy leather folder labeled Zenith Freight Internal Audits. Nia possessed a degree in finance. It took her less than 5 minutes sitting on the floor of the closet to completely decipher the messy spreadsheets. The family business was a complete and total sham. Richard had mortgaged the company assets twice over just to maintain their country club lifestyle. But the most damning documents belonged to Caleb. Nia sifted through printed bank transfers and forged invoice records. Caleb had been systematically siphoning massive amounts of money from the company payroll accounts for the past 3 years. He was embezzling funds from his own father to pay for his secret gambling debts and to cover the cost of Nia's lavish designer wardrobe. There was no trust fund. There was no generational wealth. Caleb had lied to her since the very first day they met. He was a broke, desperate fraud playing dress-up with stolen money. The sprawling suburban estate they lived in was completely underwater long before Amelia ever executed her hostile corporate takeover. The entire family was floating on a massive bubble of debt, and Amelia had simply been the one to bring the needle. Nia did not cry. She did not scream or throw things. She felt a cold wave of absolute clarity wash over her entire body. She was married to a sinking stone, and she absolutely refused to drown with him. She pulled out her smartphone and opened the camera application. She began photographing every single document in the safe. She captured crisp, high-resolution images of the overdue notices, the empty bank statements, and the undeniable paper trail of Caleb's aggressive corporate embezzlement. She documented every single shred of evidence she would need to secure an ironclad divorce settlement and protect herself from the impending legal and financial fallout. She worked methodically, ensuring every account number and forged signature was perfectly legible in the photographs. Once she had a complete digital archive of their ruin, she carefully placed the papers back into the heavy leather folders. She stacked them in the safe exactly as she had found them. She closed the heavy steel door, locked it securely, and slid the shoe rack back into place. Nia smoothed down her skirt and unlocked the bedroom door. She walked back down the grand staircase, her face a mask of perfect suburban calm. Susan was still sitting at the kitchen island, excitedly replying to Facebook comments about her evil daughter. Caleb was slumped on the sofa, staring blankly at the wall. They had absolutely no idea that the enemy was no longer just operating from a skyscraper downtown. The enemy was now standing right inside their own house, gathering ammunition for the final blow. The Vanguard Logistics Annual Charity Gala was the absolute pinnacle of the corporate social season. Hosted in the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious historic hotel, it was a spectacular display of unyielding wealth and undeniable power. Massive crystal chandeliers illuminated dozens of round tables draped in heavy black silk and adorned with towering arrangements of white orchids. The room was packed to capacity with the financial elite of Chicago. Billionaire investors, international tech moguls, and ruthless supply chain titans mingled over imported champagne and beluga caviar. I stood near the center of the room, wearing a custom-tailored emerald green evening gown, holding a crystal flute of sparkling water. I was entirely in my element. For the first time in my life, I was completely visible and universally respected. I was not the girl hiding in a damp basement. I was the architect of an empire. Far away from the glittering lights of the main ballroom, a desperate and pathetic plan was unfolding in the dimly lit service corridors. Richard, Susan, Caleb, and Nia moved swiftly through the stainless steel industrial kitchens. They were dressed in the stark black and white uniforms of the hotel catering staff. Richard had liquidated the very last of his hidden emergency cash to pay a massive bribe to a disgruntled event coordinator. That bribe secured them 4 fake security badges and temporary service clearances. Richard clutched a thick leather folder tightly to his chest. Inside that folder was a legally binding document drafted by a desperate strip mall attorney. The document was designed to immediately cancel the foreclosure of his suburban estate and legally force Vanguard Logistics to reinstate his corporate shipping contracts. His entire strategy was built on pure extortion. Richard believed that if he caused a massive public scene in front of my most valuable business partners, I would fold under the immense pressure. He thought I was still the fragile girl he could bully into submission. He assumed I would sign anything just to save my public reputation and stop the embarrassment. Nia walked silently behind her husband, carrying a silver tray of empty champagne flutes to complete her disguise. She was playing her part perfectly, but her mind was operating on an entirely different level. She knew the family was completely bankrupt. She knew Caleb was a fraud who had embezzled from his own father. She was simply waiting for the perfect moment to detonate the digital evidence she had captured on her phone. She followed her in-laws blindly toward the heavy oak ballroom doors, ready to watch the final explosive collapse of the toxic empire she had married into. The lights in the grand ballroom slowly dimmed, signaling the beginning of the keynote address. The elegant string quartet stopped playing their classical arrangements. The room fell into a respectful hush. I walked up the velvet-lined steps to the main stage. The bright spotlight followed my every move, casting a brilliant glow over my emerald gown. I stepped up to the clear acrylic podium and looked out over the sea of powerful executives. I adjusted the microphone and began my speech. I spoke clearly and confidently about the future of global supply chains and the massive charitable initiatives Vanguard Logistics was funding for the upcoming fiscal year. The audience was completely captivated, hanging on my every word. Suddenly, the heavy oak service doors at the back of the ballroom slammed open with a deafening crash. The loud sound echoed violently through the massive hall, completely shattering the refined and peaceful atmosphere. The legitimate catering staff scattered in confusion as 4 figures marched forcefully into the room. Richard and Caleb ripped off their service vests, throwing them aggressively onto the pristine, patterned carpet. Susan led the charge, her face twisted into a grotesque mask of manufactured agony. The private security guards instantly moved to intercept them, but Richard shouted at the top of his lungs. "Let us through right now!" Richard bellowed, his voice carrying over the heads of the shocked billionaires. "Get your hands off me! We are her family!" The security team hesitated for just a fraction of a second, unsure of how to handle a domestic dispute involving the chief executive officer's family in front of high-profile investors. That single second of hesitation was all Susan needed. She sprinted down the center aisle, pushing roughly past the tables of startled executives. She scrambled up the velvet stairs of the stage, her high heels catching on the fabric. I did not step back. I did not call for help. I did not flinch. Susan lunged forward and physically ripped the microphone straight out of my hand. The audio system shrieked with harsh electronic feedback, making several guests wince and cover their ears. Susan turned to face the audience of elite business leaders. She forced hot tears to stream down her face, launching into an Oscar-worthy performance of a devastated and betrayed matriarch. "Look at her," Susan screamed into the microphone, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Look at this monster you are all doing business with. She is my daughter. We clothed her. We fed her. We let her live in our home for 6 years when she had absolutely nothing to her name. And how does she repay us? She uses dirty corporate loopholes to steal the very roof over our heads. She is throwing her own elderly parents out onto the street like garbage. She is intentionally bankrupting her own brother. She is a ruthless, cold-hearted thief who destroys her own blood. The entire ballroom was paralyzed in stunned silence. The executives stared at the stage in absolute shock. Richard marched up to the base of the stage holding the leather folder high in the air for everyone to see. He slammed the folder down onto the edge of the clear acrylic podium right in front of me. He pulled a gold pen from his breast pocket and pointed the tip directly at my face. "You are going to sign this right now," Richard commanded, his voice trembling with manic desperation and rage. "You are going to cancel the foreclosure and reinstate my trucks. You are going to give us our lives back. If you do not sign this paper, I will stand right here and tell every single investor in this room exactly how you defraud innocent people. Sign the paper, Amelia, or I will make sure you lose every ounce of respect you have ever earned in this city." Caleb stood beside his father, glaring up at me with raw, unfiltered hatred. Naya stood slightly apart near the edge of the stage, watching the entire spectacle with cold, calculating eyes. The guests in the ballroom began to whisper furiously. Smartphones were being pulled out of designer purses and tuxedo pockets to record the unprecedented corporate drama. My family thought they had successfully backed me into a corner. They thought the threat of public humiliation would force me to surrender my empire and hand them back their lavish lifestyle. I looked at the gold pen Richard was shoving into my hand. I looked at Susan, who was sobbing theatrically into the stolen microphone. I looked out at the audience of billionaires who were waiting with bated breath to see how the CEO of Vanguard Logistics would handle a catastrophic public relations nightmare. I did not reach for the pen. I simply smiled. They had just walked onto the biggest stage in the city and handed me the microphone. I did not take the gold pen Richard was violently thrusting toward my face. I did not flinch or back away from his aggressive posture. I simply stood my ground on the brightly lit stage, letting the heavy silence stretch across the massive ballroom. The hundreds of billionaire investors, tech moguls, and international supply chain executives watched with unblinking attention. They were apex predators of the business world, and they could instantly recognize when someone was bluffing. Richard and Susan were sweating profusely, their amateur theatrical performance crumbling under the sheer weight of my absolute calm. I reached out with a steady hand and took the microphone right back from Susan. She was so surprised by my lack of fear that her fingers instantly released the metal handle. She stumbled backward, her fake tears drying up as genuine panic began to set in. I turned my back on my family and faced the audience of the Vanguard Logistics annual charity gala. I adjusted the microphone stand, my voice projecting loud and crystal clear across the silent room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this unexpected interruption," I said, my tone perfectly measured and professional. "My parents have just accused me of being a ruthless monster who stole their home and bankrupted their business. They claim they generously housed me and fed me while I gave absolutely nothing in return. Since they have decided to bring our private family matters onto a public stage, I believe it is only fair that we examine their claims with complete transparency." I did not wait for Richard to object. I raised my left hand and gave a sharp, subtle nod to the audio-visual control booth located at the very back of the grand ballroom. My elite technical team had been prepped for this exact contingency. The massive high-definition LED screens towering behind the podium instantly shifted. The elegant emerald and gold Vanguard Logistics corporate logos vanished completely. In their place, a stark white image illuminated the entire stage, casting a harsh, bright light directly onto Richard's and Susan's terrified faces. A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. Displayed on the 40-foot screens was the high-resolution screenshot of Richard's Facebook post from exactly 16 days ago. The text was magnified to a massive scale, making it impossible for anyone in the room to miss a single word. I turned to look at the screen and read the words aloud, my voice echoing relentlessly. "Finally, the 32-year-old leech is out. No more cooking her meals." I paused, letting the cruelty of his own words hang heavy in the air. 2,188 likes. I gestured to the magnified comment section, scrolling slowly down the massive screen. And here we have the commentary from the same woman who just stood on this stage crying about a mother's betrayed love. I pointed directly at Susan. Susan posted before and after pictures of my room referring to my living space as a pigsty. Here is my brother Caleb tagging his friends to mock me. And here are dozens of extended family members laughing about my mental health struggles and calling me a jobless loser. Richard dropped his gold pen. It hit the acrylic podium with a sharp clatter and bounced off the stage, falling onto the carpet below. His face drained of all color, turning an ashen, sickly gray. He looked out at the audience, recognizing several prominent banking executives and logistics partners he had desperately tried to impress over the years. Those powerful men and women were now staring back at him with expressions of absolute disgust. "Turn it off," Richard hissed, his voice reduced to a frantic, terrified whisper. "Turn that screen off right now, Amelia. This is a private family joke. You are taking it out of context." I ignored his pathetic pleading. I turned back to the audience. "My parents stood before you tonight and called me a leech." I stated, my voice rising with undeniable power. "They claimed they sacrificed everything to support me while I maliciously plotted to throw them out onto the street. They demanded that I sign a contract to give them back their wealth. But there is a massive flaw in their narrative. You cannot steal wealth from people who have been entirely bankrupt for years." I gave another sharp nod to the control booth. The Facebook post vanished from the giant screens. It was immediately replaced by a staggering array of certified banking statements, corporate ledgers, and real estate financial records. The sensitive account numbers were redacted, but the names, the dates, and the massive dollar amounts were highlighted in brilliant red ink. "These are the certified financial statements for the past 4 years," I announced, gesturing broadly to the glowing data. "My parents called me a leech, but these documents prove that every single one of their living expenses was secretly paid by me." Susan let out a strangled gasp, covering her mouth with both hands. Caleb took a step backward, his eyes darting frantically across the overwhelming financial evidence being broadcast to the city's elite. I walked across the stage, pointing to the specific columns on the massive screens. "Here are the property tax payments for their sprawling suburban estate, paid directly from a Vanguard Logistics holding account. Here are the utility bills, the grocery deliveries, and the massive maintenance fees for the house they claimed they were generously letting me live in. And right here," I pointed to a particularly large highlighted figure, "is the exorbitant monthly membership fee for their exclusive country club. I paid for the very food they ate. I paid for the lights they used to type their cruel insults on the internet. I paid for the roof over their heads while they forced me to sleep in a damp basement." The murmurs in the ballroom grew louder, shifting from shocked whispers to open condemnation. The executives in the room were calculating the numbers. They understood corporate finance, and they instantly recognized that Richard was a complete fraud. He was not a successful business owner. He was a hollow dependent shell floating entirely on my invisible capital. But I am not finished. I continued, projecting my voice over the rising noise of the crowd. "Richard claims I illegally terminated his corporate shipping contracts. Let us look at his company, Zenith Freight." The screens shifted again, displaying the vendor agreements and the operational audits. For 4 years, Vanguard Logistics funneled highly lucrative shipping contracts to his failing business. I revealed, exposing the final layer of his delusion. I artificially kept his trucks on the road. I subsidized his payroll. Zenith Freight has not turned a legitimate profit in half a decade. Richard, you did not build an empire. You were simply a charity case running on my payroll. I terminated your contracts because your operational mismanagement and your son's relentless embezzlement finally became a liability my corporation could no longer tolerate. Richard staggered backward physically, recoiling from the undeniable truth projected behind me. His knees buckled slightly, and he had to grab the edge of the stage curtain to keep from collapsing. He had walked into this gala believing he could use public humiliation to bend me to his will. Instead, he had unknowingly marched himself straight into a financial execution. Susan was shaking uncontrollably, tears of genuine terror, now streaming down her ruined makeup. She looked out at the audience, seeking a single sympathetic face, but found only cold, judgmental stares. The wealthy society she had worshipped her entire life was actively rejecting her. Near the edge of the stage, I caught sight of Nia. My sister-in-law was standing perfectly still, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She was staring up at the massive screens, her sharp eyes locked onto the financial documents detailing Caleb's corporate embezzlement. The truth I was broadcasting perfectly aligned with the secret evidence she had discovered in their hidden safe. Nia looked from the screen down to Caleb, who was sweating and shrinking under the bright stage lights. The final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place in her mind. The explosive family implosion was reaching its absolute peak, and the stage was perfectly set for the final devastating blow. I did not stop there. The corporate subsidies were just the foundation of their financial parasitism. I wanted the entire ballroom to see the granular details of their personal greed. I raised my hand again, signaling the control booth to proceed to the next slide. The massive screens flickered. The dry corporate ledgers vanished, replaced by high-resolution scans of personal credit card statements and luxury purchase receipts. The gasps from the audience grew louder, rippling across the tables of the ballroom like a wave. You see, keeping a failing trucking company afloat was not enough for my family, I announced, pacing the stage with a slow, deliberate rhythm. They also required me to fund their extravagant personal lifestyles, while they locked me in a basement with leaking pipes. I wanted the entire ballroom to see the granular details of their personal greed. I pointed to the left side of the towering screen. Let us start with my brother Caleb. Caleb loves to portray himself as a highly successful executive. 2 months ago, he drove a brand new Porsche into the country club parking lot to show off to his friends. He posted dozens of photos leaning against the hood wearing expensive sunglasses. It is a beautiful machine. But there is a slight problem with his narrative. A crisp digital document appeared magnifying a specific transaction. I read it aloud. Down payment and first 6 months of lease installments for one Porsche Panamera. Paid in full. But look closely at the name on the credit card used for the transaction. Caleb physically shrank, putting his hands up as if to block the glaring light of the screen. The name illuminated in bold red letters was mine. Amelia. Caleb did not buy that car. I stated, my voice laced with pure, absolute venom. He used a stolen credit card linked directly to my personal accounts. He is not a successful executive. He is a grown man who commits credit card fraud to maintain the illusion of wealth. Nia stood rigidly at the edge of the stage. Her eyes were burning holes into the side of Caleb's head. She already knew about the Hermes bag, but seeing the luxury car lease displayed on a 40-foot screen in front of billionaires was the absolute confirmation of his pathetic reality. Every single thing he had ever given her was bought with stolen money. I shifted my focus to the center of the screen. And then we have Susan, the devoted mother who just spent 5 minutes crying on this stage about how I betrayed her love. 2 weeks before she posted on Facebook celebrating my departure from her house, she took a lavish 10-day vacation to a 5-star resort in Maui. The screen transitioned to a brilliant collage of receipts: first-class airline tickets, luxury spa treatments, exorbitant dinner bills at beachfront restaurants, a private helicopter tour over the coast. She told all her friends on social media that Richard surprised her with a second honeymoon. I said, projecting my voice clearly over the rising murmurs of the crowd. But Richard did not pay for a single macadamia nut on that island. The total cost of the trip was $28,000. Every single cent was charged to my corporate Vanguard account. She drank vintage champagne on a private balcony using money generated by the daughter she openly despised. Susan covered her face with her trembling hands, letting out a loud, pathetic wail. Several women sitting at the front tables, women who regularly played tennis with Susan and had likely liked her victimizing Facebook posts earlier that week, were now staring at her with pure, unadulterated contempt. The fake tears she had shed minutes ago now worked entirely against her. The high society she worshipped saw her for exactly what she was, a parasite who exploited her own child for a beach vacation. Finally, I turned my attention back to Richard. He was leaning heavily against the podium, looking as though he might physically collapse. His expensive, wrinkled suit hung off his frame. The arrogance that had fueled his entire life was completely gone. "But the most pathetic display belongs to the patriarch," I said, locking my eyes directly onto his terrified face. Richard loves to boast about his self-made empire. He demands respect from everyone he meets. But let us look at what happens when a self-made man cannot even afford basic maintenance. The screen changed one final time. It displayed a series of mundane but incredibly expensive invoices. Roof repairs for the Zenith Freight main warehouse. Engine replacements for 5 separate delivery trucks. Even the bill for the commercial landscaping at his corporate headquarters. "Your business was so completely bankrupt, Richard, that you could not even afford to fix the leaky roof over your own employees' heads," I stated, my tone devoid of any mercy. "You defaulted on your maintenance loans. Your mechanics refused to work on your trucks because their paychecks kept bouncing. I paid those repair bills. I paid the landscapers. I kept the lights on in your miserable empty warehouse while you drank scotch and called me a failure." The silence in the grand ballroom was absolutely deafening. The mask Richard had carefully worn for his entire life shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The men he had golfed with, the investors he had desperately tried to court, the competitors he had arrogantly dismissed, they were all watching him burn. The illusion of the powerful self-made transport titan was completely annihilated. He was exposed as an incompetent fraud who had to rely on his abused daughter just to fix a broken truck engine. The people in the audience who had momentarily felt sympathy for the crying parents were now visibly disgusted. The elite society of Chicago does not tolerate weakness, but they absolutely despise financial fraud masquerading as wealth. The collective judgment of the room pressed down on my family like a physical weight. Richard could not meet the eyes of his former business partners sitting in the front row. He stared blankly at the patterned carpet, his chest heaving with shallow, defeated breaths. Susan was sobbing uncontrollably, but no one rushed forward to comfort her. Caleb looked around frantically like a trapped animal, realizing there was absolutely no escape from the undeniable digital evidence glowing brightly above them. I had not just defeated them. I had completely dismantled their entire reality. I had taken the very things they valued most, their status, their reputation, their fabricated wealth, and I had incinerated them on the largest possible stage. The destruction was total, and it was entirely verified by cold, hard financial data. Nia stood near the edge of the stage, her sharp eyes analyzing the total devastation I had just unleashed upon her husband and his parents. She was a deeply pragmatic woman. She had grown up understanding the harsh realities of survival. She had married Caleb because he presented an illusion of generational wealth and corporate stability. Now that illusion was entirely incinerated. The massive screens behind me had confirmed everything she discovered in Caleb's hidden floor safe 2 weeks ago. The family was completely bankrupt. The estate was foreclosed. The logistics company was dead. And worse, Caleb was a fraud who had dragged her into his pathetic financial grave. Nia looked out at the audience of billionaires and influential executives. She knew exactly how elite society operated. If she stood silently by her husband's side, she would be permanently branded as a co-conspirator in his financial crimes. She would be blacklisted, shunned, and left to drown in the massive debt he had accumulated. Nia refused to be collateral damage. She had diligently photographed all the evidence in his safe. Now she needed to publicly separate herself from the sinking ship before it dragged her under the dark water. Susan was still standing near the podium, sobbing hysterically into her hands, attempting to generate a final ounce of pity from the disgusted crowd. Nia marched across the stage, her high heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She did not look at Caleb. She walked directly up to her mother-in-law. With a swift, aggressive motion, Nia snatched the heavy microphone right out of Susan's trembling hands. Susan gasped in shock, stumbling backward, but Nia completely ignored her. Nia turned to face the vast ballroom. Her posture was rigid, her expression completely devoid of any sympathy or fear. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nia announced, her strong voice ringing clearly through the sound system. "My name is Nia, and until about 5 minutes ago, I was married to Caleb." A new wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the audience. I stepped back, crossing my arms, allowing my sister-in-law to take control of the narrative. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was saving herself, and I was perfectly willing to let her deliver the final fatal blow to my family. Nia pointed a manicured finger directly at Caleb, who was cowering near the edge of the stage. "Amelia just showed you how this family exploited her for years." Nia continued, projecting her voice with fierce determination. "But Amelia does not even know the deepest layer of the rot inside Zenith Freight. She thinks Richard went bankrupt because he is an incompetent businessman. And while that is absolutely true, it is not the only reason his company collapsed." Richard jerked his head up, his tear-stained face twisting in confusion. He stared at his daughter-in-law, unable to comprehend what she was saying. Nia locked eyes with Richard, her gaze as cold as ice. "Your golden boy did not just steal his sister's credit card to buy me designer bags, Richard. He stole from you. He has been systematically siphoning hundreds of thousands of dollars directly out of your corporate payroll accounts for the past 3 years. Richard let out a choked, agonizing gasp. His knees buckled, but he managed to stay upright, grabbing the clear acrylic podium for support. "What are you talking about?" Richard wheezed, his eyes darting frantically between Nia and his son. Caleb raised his hands, backing away toward the heavy velvet curtains. "Nia, shut your mouth!" Caleb stammered, his voice pitching into a terrified squeak. "Do not do this. I am doing this because I refuse to go to prison for your crimes," Nia shouted fiercely, turning the microphone toward him. "I cracked your digital safe, Caleb. I found the dual ledgers. I found the hidden bank statements. You created a massive slush fund using your father's business accounts." Nia turned back to the audience, making sure every billionaire in the room heard the pathetic details of his betrayal. Caleb drained his father's commercial assets to play cryptocurrency markets. He lost over $400,000 chasing digital coins, while his own truck drivers were missing their paychecks. But that is not even the most disgusting part. Nia took a step closer to Caleb, her voice dripping with pure, unfiltered disgust. "The money he did not lose on the internet, he spent on his mistress. He has been using Zenith Freight funds to pay the rent on a luxury downtown condo for a 22-year-old girl for the last 18 months. He bought her diamond necklaces while his parents were begging Amelia to fix their leaky roof." The ballroom erupted into sheer pandemonium. The executives gasped openly, exchanging horrified glances. It was one thing to be a failed businessman. It was an entirely different level of humiliation to be publicly bankrupted by your own cheating, embezzling son. Richard stood completely paralyzed. His brain desperately tried to process the catastrophic revelation. He had spent his entire life worshiping Caleb. He had praised his son at every country club dinner. He had overlooked Caleb's laziness, excused his arrogant behavior, and constantly protected him from any real consequences. He had thrown his own hard-working daughter out onto the street because he believed Caleb was the true heir to his legacy. And Caleb had gutted him like a fish. Caleb had destroyed the family company, stolen his retirement, and humiliated him in front of the most powerful people in Chicago, all to fund his gambling addiction and hide a mistress. A low, guttural sound ripped from Richard's throat. It was not a sob. It was the raw, terrifying roar of a man whose entire reality had just violently shattered into jagged, unfixable pieces. "You stole from me!" Richard screamed, his face turning a dangerous, violent shade of crimson. "I gave you everything. I protected you. You destroyed my company." Richard released his grip on the podium. He did not hesitate. He lunged across the stage with terrifying speed, throwing his entire body weight directly at his son. Caleb let out a high-pitched shriek, attempting to turn and run, but he tripped over the thick audio cables taped to the stage floor. Richard hit him like a freight train. Both men went crashing down onto the hard wooden stage. Richard grabbed Caleb by the collar of his ruined suit jacket, pulling him up and slamming him back down against the floorboards. "You pathetic thief!" Richard roared, raising his fist and striking his son squarely in the jaw. "You ruined my life. You ruined my business." Caleb thrashed wildly, trying to block his father's frantic punches. "Dad, stop!" Caleb shrieked, blood starting to drip from his split lip. "Please stop." Susan stood frozen in sheer terror, watching her husband and her golden boy brutally tear each other apart on a brilliantly lit stage in front of hundreds of silent, staring billionaires. She let out a piercing, horrified scream, begging them to stop, but neither man even heard her over the sound of their own violent rage. I stood near the edge of the stage, watching the absolute destruction of my family. I did not signal my elite security team to intervene right away. I let the executives in the ballroom watch the pathetic reality of the men who had dared to threaten my empire. They were acting like wild animals trapped in a cage of their own making. Nia stood beside me, holding the microphone, her posture rigid and victorious. She had successfully completely detached herself from their sinking ship. They were no longer my problem. They were completely and totally destroying each other. I stood at the edge of the stage, watching my elite security team finally intervene. Two massive guards grabbed Richard by the shoulders, hoisting him forcibly into the air, while a third guard dragged Caleb away from the shattered acrylic podium. Caleb's face was bleeding, and his expensive suit was completely ruined. Richard was still screaming hoarse, breathless threats at his own son. Susan was collapsed on the floor, utterly destroyed by the public spectacle. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for any of them. I turned my back on the pathetic brawl and gracefully descended the velvet-lined stairs, stepping away from the chaos and back onto the main ballroom floor. My lead attorney, David, was waiting for me at the bottom of the steps. He held a glowing silver tablet in his hands, his expression tight with focused urgency. The physical threat on the stage had been neutralized, but David was already monitoring the digital perimeter. He handed the tablet to me. "Amelia, we have a secondary situation developing online." David stated, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Your Aunt Brenda has been watching the live updates from the gala through various social media channels. She just launched a Facebook Live broadcast from her living room. She is currently speaking to over 800 viewers and actively attempting to spin the narrative to protect Susan." I took the tablet and looked at the screen. There was Brenda sitting on her tacky floral sofa, holding her smartphone far too close to her face. She was drinking heavily from a large glass of wine, her makeup smeared as she performed her own desperate version of outrage. I turned up the volume just enough to hear her shrill voice. "Do not believe a single word that ungrateful girl says," Brenda shrieked into her camera, pointing an accusing finger at her viewers. "Amelia is a manipulative sociopath. She hired actors to create those fake bank statements. She is using dark money to terrorize her own flesh and blood. Susan is a saint who gave that girl everything. Amelia is just a bitter, lonely dropout trying to destroy a beautiful family because she is jealous." I handed the tablet back to David. A cold, calculating smile touched the corners of my mouth. Brenda had always been the loudest voice in the family, the one who thrived on spreading malicious gossip and tearing me down to make herself feel superior. She thought she was safely insulated from the fallout because she was hiding behind a screen miles away from the gala. She had completely forgotten the severe warning I issued to her just 2 weeks ago. "David," I said, my voice perfectly calm, "open the encrypted legal drive. Pull up the federal dossier we prepared for Brenda." David tapped the screen of his tablet with practiced efficiency. The document loaded instantly. It was a fully drafted criminal complaint prepared explicitly for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The charge was felony identity theft and federal wire fraud. Attached to the complaint were pristine high-resolution scans of the $10,000 loan application from 6 years ago. The documents prominently featured my stolen Social Security number, the forged signatures, and the undeniable IP address logs, proving the application was submitted directly from Brenda's home network. "Send it directly to her personal email address," I commanded. Flag it, with high importance. David executed the command without hesitation. The email vanished into the digital ether, flying straight toward its target. I took the tablet back from David and kept my eyes glued to Brenda's live broadcast. She was in the middle of another aggressive rant claiming that Vanguard Logistics was a fraudulent shell company. Then her smartphone chimed loudly, indicating a new priority email. Brenda paused her rant. She swiped down on her screen to read the notification. I watched the exact moment her entire world collapsed in real time. Brenda's eyes widened to a comical size. All the false bravado, the arrogant posturing, the wine-fueled confidence completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. She read the subject line: FBI criminal complaint draft, identity theft. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. She visibly started trembling, her hands shaking so violently that the camera framing bounced erratically. She realized the documents were real. She realized she was staring directly at a federal prison sentence. I have to go. Brenda stammered, her voice reduced to a breathless, panic-stricken squeak. She fumbled clumsily with her phone, frantically pressing buttons to terminate the broadcast. The video feed abruptly cut to black. 10 seconds later, my personal smartphone began to ring in my hand. I looked down at the caller identification. It was Brenda. She was calling me. The ballroom was still buzzing with the chaotic aftermath of the physical altercation on the stage. The billionaire investors and tech moguls were whispering furiously to one another, processing the absolute destruction of Richard's trucking empire. I decided it was time to silence the room one final time. I needed everyone in this hotel to understand the exact caliber of people who had dared to challenge me. I walked purposefully back toward the base of the stage. I picked up a secondary microphone resting on a nearby technical table. I answered the phone call, turning on the speaker function, and held the device directly against the microphone. Amelia Brenda's voice boomed through the massive stadium sound system, echoing off the crystal chandeliers and the vaulted ceilings. Her tone was completely unrecognizable. She was sobbing hysterically, choking on her own tears, begging for her life. "Amelia, please, please, you cannot do this to me." The entire ballroom went dead silent instantly. Hundreds of heads turned back toward me, captivated by the raw, unfiltered terror projecting from the speakers. "I am listening, Brenda," I said, my voice amplified and freezing cold. "Tell the room exactly why you are calling." "I am so sorry," Brenda wailed, her pride completely annihilated by the threat of federal prosecution. "I took the money. I admit it. I stole your social security number when you were in the hospital. I forged your signature for the $10,000 loan. I just wanted to go on the cruise. I did not mean to ruin your credit. Please do not send that file to the FBI, Amelia. I cannot go to federal prison. I will lose my house. I will lose everything. Please, I am begging you. I will take back everything I said on the live stream. I will tell everyone Susan is a liar. Just please do not send me to jail." The collective gasp from the elite audience was absolute. They had just heard a grown woman explicitly confess to committing a federal felony against her own niece, while her niece was hospitalized for depression. The sheer depravity of my extended family was now completely fully exposed to the most powerful people in the city. There was no more hiding. There was no more spinning the narrative. I stood in the center of the silent ballroom, holding the microphone steady. I let Brenda's pathetic, desperate sobs echo through the vast space for 10 long seconds, ensuring every single billionaire in attendance heard the true sound of her defeat. "You should have kept your mouth shut, Brenda," I stated, my voice flat and devoid of any mercy. "You wanted to perform for an audience. Now you get to perform for a judge." "No, Amelia." "Please wait," Brenda screamed. I pulled the phone away from the microphone. I pressed the red button, ending the call instantly. I opened her contact profile and permanently blocked her number. I handed the microphone back to the technical staff and handed my phone to David. The silence in the room was heavier than iron. The destruction was comprehensive. The stage was stained with blood from the brawl. My parents were completely bankrupt and publicly humiliated. My brother was exposed as a corporate embezzler, and my loud, obnoxious aunt was now waiting for federal agents to knock on her front door. The family that had thrown me away was completely eradicated. The morning after the Vanguard Logistics annual charity gala broke clear and freezing cold over Chicago. I did not attend the office that day. I sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse drinking a dark espresso and watching the news alerts roll in across my tablet. The financial destruction I had orchestrated was no longer just a private family matter. It was a localized economic earthquake. By 9 in the morning, the court-appointed receivers arrived at the headquarters of Zenith Freight. Richard had spent 30 years building an illusion of corporate dominance, but it took less than 30 minutes for the authorities to completely dismantle it. Heavily armed sheriff's deputies secured the perimeter of his massive warehouse facilities. They wrapped thick steel chains around the iron gates and padlocked the main entrances. Richard stood on the cracked asphalt in a wrinkled trench coat, watching government agents plaster bright orange seizure notices across the glass doors of his beloved executive office. His corporate bank accounts were instantly frozen. The remaining fleet of delivery trucks was officially impounded to satisfy the massive debts he owed to my subsidiary. He was locked out of his own empire, stripped of his title, and reduced to a spectator at his own financial funeral. There was no bailout coming. There were no hidden reserves. The arrogant patriarch who had demanded absolute obedience from me was now standing on the sidewalk with absolutely nothing to his name. While Richard was losing his commercial kingdom, his golden boy son was facing an entirely different breed of catastrophe. Caleb woke up that same morning, nursing a bruised jaw from his father's frantic punches on the gala stage. He expected Nia to pack her designer bags and quietly walk out the door. He vastly underestimated the woman he had married. Nia did not just leave him. She surgically, completely annihilated him. She marched straight into the sleek offices of the most aggressive divorce attorney in the city. Along with her divorce petition, Nia submitted a massive encrypted file containing every single high-resolution photograph she had taken of Caleb's secret floor safe. She handed over the dual ledgers, the offshore bank statements, and the forged payroll invoices, proving his extensive corporate embezzlement. By Tuesday afternoon, 2 uniformed detectives arrived at the sprawling suburban estate. They did not come to ask polite questions. They presented Caleb with a formal summons for grand larceny and corporate fraud. Caleb was dragged out of the house in handcuffs, whining and begging for his father to call a lawyer. But Richard had no money left to pay a legal retainer. Caleb had stolen the very funds that could have saved him from a prison sentence. The golden child was finally facing the severe, unfiltered consequences of his own pathetic actions. Susan experienced an entirely different kind of execution. She had always valued her social standing above her own flesh and blood. She believed she could simply smile and manipulate her way out of any public relations disaster. On Wednesday, she put on her most expensive cashmere sweater, applied her makeup with trembling hands, and drove her leased luxury sports car to the elite suburban country club. She intended to sit in the dining room, order a mimosa, and convince her wealthy friends that the gala incident was just a massive theatrical misunderstanding. She walked up to the grand mahogany entrance and swiped her membership card. The electronic reader flashed a harsh red light, emitting a loud, declining buzz. Susan tried again, her panic rising. The heavy oak doors remained firmly locked. The club manager stepped out, examining Susan with a look of pure, unadulterated revulsion. The video of her attempting to hijack my charity gala had circulated through every group chat in the zip code. The board of directors had convened an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to revoke her membership permanently. The manager coldly informed Susan that she was no longer welcome on the premises and signaled for security to escort her back to her vehicle. Susan stood in the manicured parking lot, watching the women she had gossiped with for decades, staring at her through the dining room windows. They pointed their manicured fingers and turned their backs. Her social exile was absolute and irrevocable. She was completely erased from the high society she worshipped. The crushing reality of their utter destitution finally broke their stubborn pride. Desperation replaced their arrogance. My phone carrier logged dozens of blocked calls. They attempted to reach me through my corporate email. They tried messaging my executive assistants. Susan even sent a pathetic handwritten letter to the Vanguard Logistics headquarters begging for a private meeting to discuss family healing. They wanted to apologize. They wanted to negotiate. They wanted me to open my checkbook and save them from the dark abyss they had willingly jumped into. I did not read the letter. I did not listen to the voicemails. I handed every single communication over to David. My lead attorney moved with lethal legal efficiency. By Thursday morning, a process server knocked on the door of their foreclosed estate. He handed Richard, Susan, and Caleb 3 thick manila envelopes. They were legally binding comprehensive restraining orders signed by a superior court judge. The orders explicitly prohibited them from coming within 500 feet of my person, my residence, or any Vanguard Logistics property. Any attempt to contact me by phone, email, or third-party proxy would result in immediate arrest. David had built an impenetrable fortress of legal steel around me. They had thrown me out of their house and told me I was dead to them. Now they were legally mandated to treat me like a ghost. I sat on my white leather sofa, looking out at the glittering skyline. The storm had passed, and it had washed away every last trace of the toxic family that had tried to bury me. The deadline arrived with the cold, unyielding precision of a ticking clock. It was a brisk Tuesday morning when the final legal grace period officially expired. I did not sit in my downtown penthouse to receive the news. I wanted to witness the absolute conclusion of my design with my own eyes. My private driver navigated my custom black Cadillac slowly down the familiar tree-lined streets of the wealthy Chicago suburb. The neighborhood was quiet and perfectly manicured, an artificial paradise built on heavy mortgages and fragile egos. The driver pulled the heavy luxury vehicle to a smooth stop directly across the street from the sprawling estate I now legally owned. I pressed a silver button on the door panel. The darkly tinted rear window glided down with a soft mechanical hum, allowing the crisp morning air to enter the climate-controlled cabin. I sat back against the premium leather upholstery and watched the final act of their suburban tragedy unfold. 2 marked county sheriff cruisers were already parked at steep angles in the wide circular driveway. Their emergency light bars were switched off, but their presence was a blaring siren to every nosy neighbor on the block. The front doors of the cruisers opened simultaneously. 4 uniformed deputies stepped out, adjusting their utility belts and holding thick clipboards, carrying the official court-ordered eviction mandate. They marched up the brick walkway with heavy synchronized steps. They did not ring the doorbell. The lead deputy pounded his heavy fist against the custom oak front door. The sound echoed down the quiet street, a harsh physical manifestation of their financial ruin. The door opened slowly. Richard stood in the threshold. The arrogant, commanding patriarch of the family was completely gone. He wore a faded gray sweatshirt and baggy sweatpants. His shoulders were slumped forward, and he looked physically smaller, as if the sheer weight of his bankruptcy had literally crushed his spine. Susan hovered nervously right behind his shoulder. She was not wearing her designer makeup or her expensive pearls. Her face was pale and drawn tight with exhaustion. The lead deputy handed Richard the eviction notice and pointed firmly toward the sidewalk, indicating that their legal right to occupy the premises had terminated exactly at 8 in the morning. I rested my chin on my hand, observing the pure devastation on their faces. They had spent decades judging people who lived in poverty. They had called me a jobless leech and threw me out onto the street without a single ounce of hesitation. Now the merciless wheel of justice had turned, and they were the ones being forcibly removed from their own sanctuary. Then came the most pathetic display of their entire collapse. They had no money left in their frozen bank accounts to hire a professional moving company. They could not afford a sleek moving van or a team of workers to carefully pack their belongings into labeled cardboard boxes. Susan stepped out onto the grand front porch, holding a crumpled yellow box of heavy-duty plastic garbage bags. The woman who used to host lavish country club dinners and boast about her imported Italian furniture was now frantically shaking open cheap black trash bags. She dropped to her knees on the porch and began hastily stuffing her remaining clothes and shoes into the dark plastic. Richard grabbed a roll of packing tape and began taping the bags shut. They worked in a frantic, humiliating frenzy, terrified of the armed deputies standing silently over them. Richard grabbed 2 heavy garbage bags by the plastic drawstrings and dragged them down the front steps. The cheap plastic snagged on the brick walkway, tearing open and spilling a tangle of old sweaters and framed photographs onto the damp grass. He cursed loudly, scrambling to shove the items back into the torn plastic while the neighbors watched from their front windows. It was a brilliant, breathtaking portrait of poetic justice. They were reduced to hauling their entire lives in the exact same bags people use to throw away rotting food. While Richard and Susan were desperately dragging their garbage bags toward a rusty, rented pickup truck parked on the street, a second fleet of vehicles turned into the neighborhood. 4 massive, heavy-duty commercial construction trucks rolled down the block. The sides of the trucks proudly displayed the sharp emerald and gold logo of Vanguard Real Estate Development. The massive diesel engines roared loudly, drowning out Richard's frantic cursing. The trucks pulled directly onto the manicured front lawn, tearing deep, muddy tire tracks through Susan's prized rose bushes. A crew of 20 contractors wearing hard hats and reflective safety vests jumped out of the vehicles. The lead foreman walked straight past Richard and Susan, flashing a signed corporate work order at the sheriff's deputies. The deputies nodded and stepped aside, allowing the construction crew to enter the property. I watched the foreman point directly toward the side of the house where the basement access doors were located. The crew immediately went to work. They unspooled thick yellow power cords and hauled heavy demolition equipment down the concrete steps. They were targeting the exact windowless, damp basement where I had spent 6 grueling years of my life. The sound of heavy sledgehammers and electric saws suddenly erupted from the lower level of the estate. The contractors were brutally smashing through the concrete walls and ripping out the moldy drywall. They hauled out the rusty folding card table where I had coded my first logistics algorithm. They dragged out the cheap mattress where I had slept while fighting my depression. They were completely gutting the entire foundation of the house to the bare dirt. The basement that Susan had mockingly called a pigsty on the internet was being violently erased from existence. I had ordered a total reconstruction of the property. I was purging every single microscopic trace of my trauma from that house. Susan dropped a garbage bag full of shoes onto the driveway. She stared in absolute horror at the construction crew casually destroying the lower half of the estate she used to call her castle. She placed her hands over her ears, trying to block out the deafening sound of the sledgehammers tearing her pristine world apart. She looked utterly broken. Richard paused his miserable labor, wiping sweat and dirt from his forehead. He turned his head and looked toward the street. His tired, defeated eyes slowly focused on the sleek black Cadillac parked at the curb. He saw the lowered, tinted window. He saw me sitting comfortably in the luxurious leather interior, wearing a sharp designer coat and watching him drag his garbage bags across the mud. He froze completely. He wanted to scream. He wanted to march over to the car and demand answers. But the 2 armed sheriff's deputies were watching him closely, and the strict legal parameters of the restraining order bound him like invisible chains. If he took a single step toward my vehicle, he would be tackled to the pavement and thrown into the back of a police cruiser. He was entirely trapped in a cage of his own making. I did not smile. I did not wave. I simply maintained cold, unblinking eye contact with the man who had tried to destroy me. I watched the realization wash over his face. He finally understood the absolute totality of his defeat. He lowered his head, breaking the eye contact, and went back to dragging his black trash bags through the mud. I pressed the silver button on the door panel. The tinted window glided silently back up, sealing me inside the warm, quiet sanctuary of my vehicle, and shutting out the pathetic noise of their ruined lives forever. I sat in the quiet hum of the luxury vehicle, preparing to give my driver the command to pull away from the curb. The tinted glass separated me from the chaotic demolition happening on the front lawn. I watched Richard drop the black plastic garbage bag into the muddy grass. He stared at my sleek black Cadillac. The absolute desperation in his chest finally outweighed his fear of the armed deputies standing near the porch. He took a hesitant step toward the street. Susan saw him moving and immediately followed her face streaked with dirt and tears. They shuffled across the ruined lawn, leaving deep footprints in the mud where the heavy construction trucks had torn up the grass. The deputies placed their hands on their utility belts, ready to intervene, but the sidewalk was public property. The officers allowed them to approach the curb. Richard stopped just inches from the passenger side door of my vehicle. He raised a shaking hand and tapped weakly against the dark glass. He looked like a completely broken man, stripped of every single ounce of the arrogant pride he had worn like a crown for his entire life. I reached over to the electronic control panel and pressed the silver button. The heavy window glided down just a few inches, allowing the bitter morning wind to slip into the climate-controlled cabin. I did not take off my dark designer sunglasses. I sat perfectly still, looking at the two people who had tormented me for 3 decades. Amelia. Richard choked out, his voice cracking with raw, unfiltered panic. "Please do not do this. Please do not drive away and leave us like this." Susan pushed her way to the window, clutching a torn plastic bag full of wrinkled clothes to her chest. She was weeping uncontrollably, her tears dropping onto the cold asphalt. "Amelia, please, sweetheart." Susan begged, her voice pitching into a hysterical wail. "We have absolutely nowhere to go. We have no money. We cannot sleep on the street. We are your parents. We raised you. You cannot just abandon your own flesh and blood. We are family. Give us one more chance to make this right." They stood there shivering in their cheap sweatpants, completely discarding whatever dignity they had left. The people who had laughed at my pain, the people who had proudly bragged to their country club friends about throwing me out, were now begging on their knees next to the gutter. They tried to use the very concept of family as a weapon, hoping I still had a shred of that desperate daughter inside me. They thought the biological tie between us would act as an emergency parachute to save them from the concrete pavement. I looked at them through the dark lenses of my sunglasses, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, supreme clarity. I did not feel angry anymore. I did not feel sad. I just felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. Family does not post humiliating pictures of their daughter online to farm 2,000 likes from strangers, I stated, my voice cutting through the freezing air like a surgical blade. Family does not steal credit cards or exploit mental health struggles for a cheap laugh. You stopped being my flesh and blood the exact second you decided my trauma was your entertainment. Richard opened his mouth to formulate another desperate excuse, but I did not let him speak. "I am not abandoning you, Richard." I continued, maintaining direct eye contact through the dark lenses. "I am simply following your exact instructions. I am doing exactly what you wrote on your public Facebook post 16 days ago. I am cleaning out the leeches." Susan let out a loud, agonizing gasp, dropping her plastic bag onto the wet pavement. Richard stepped back, his face draining of the last tiny drop of hope he possessed. The realization hit them with the force of a physical blow. There was no negotiation, there was no mercy. Oh, the execution was absolute and final. I reached for the door panel. "Enjoy your new life," I said smoothly. I pressed the silver button. The tinted glass window slowly glided upward, shutting out their pathetic cries and sealing them outside in the freezing cold. I turned my head and looked straight forward. "Drive," I instructed my chauffeur. The heavy engine of the Cadillac purred quietly as the luxury vehicle pulled away from the curb. I glanced into the side mirror one last time. Richard and Susan were left standing completely alone on the sidewalk, surrounded by torn black trash bags and the deafening roar of the sledgehammers destroying their former kingdom. I did not look back again. The empire was mine, and the dead weight was permanently severed. That was the exact moment I finally took my life back. I walked away from the people who demanded my loyalty, while offering me nothing but abuse. It took me 6 long years living in a damp basement to build the financial power required to dismantle their toxic structure. But the real victory was not acquiring their real estate or bankrupting their fraudulent company. The real victory was realizing that my worth was never defined by their cruel opinions. I forged my own empire from the ground up, and I made absolutely sure that the people who tried to bury me were the ones who ended up in the dirt. Blood does not give anyone a free pass to treat you like a stepping stone. You do not owe your success, your peace, or your sanity to people who only value you when you are useful to them. Sometimes the most empowering thing you can do is look the people who hurt you dead in the eye and hand them the exact consequences they earned. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to draw a hard permanent boundary with toxic family members? Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to protect you because they became the very threat you needed protection from? Tell me your story in the comments section below. Let us build a community of people who refuse to be victims. If my journey resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about reclaiming your power and taking back your life. Do not let anyone write your narrative. Hold your ground, set your boundaries, and never apologize for protecting your peace. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. The greatest lie society routinely feeds us is that blood is thicker than water. We are taught to endlessly endure disrespect, exploitation, and humiliation simply because we share DNA with our abusers. But the truth is profoundly different. Biological ties do not grant anyone an unconditional pass to destroy your peace. When the people who are supposed to protect and nurture you become the very predators you need protection from, walking away is not an act of betrayal. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. For years, I was conditioned to believe I was a failure because I refused to conform to their shallow and materialistic mold. But my journey proves that your inherent worth is never defined by those who are intentionally blind to it. Sometimes the most powerful strategy is to retreat into the shadows. You must embrace temporary discomfort, ignore the malicious noise, and silently build your empire from the ground up. Let them laugh at your expense. Let them post their cruel jokes online to farm cheap validation. While they are busy performing for an audience of strangers, you must focus entirely on laying the unbreakable foundation of your financial and emotional independence. True justice is not about matching their toxicity or acting out of blind rage. It is about absolute accountability. It is about holding up a mirror to their sheer hypocrisy and calmly handing them the exact consequences they have actively earned. You are never obligated to be the financial or emotional savior for the exact same people who gladly pushed you into the fire. Empowerment begins the moment you stop seeking approval from toxic relatives and start fiercely protecting your own boundaries. You alone hold the pen to your own life story. If you are finally ready to stop apologizing for protecting your peace and evicting the toxicity from your life, hit that subscribe button, share your own survival story in the comments below, and join our community of unstoppable women.